Welcome to my channel. Support our channel by subscribing. Your subscription helps us grow and create more intriguing content like this. Now, let's dive into today's story. Ethan Lawson, a tech entrepreneur in his mid-30s, poured his heart and soul into his business, often leaving his personal life on the back burner. His wife, Lily, also in her 30s, ran a successful online boutique and took great pride in her work. Despite their busy lives, Ethan thought they shared a strong bond, until a single day changed everything. Mark Everett, their landlord and a familiar face in their neighborhood, was a friendly man in his 40s, frequently around for minor repairs and friendly chats. However, he had a hidden side that would soon unravel Ethan's life. Ethan hadn't taken a day off in months. The stress of running his tech consultancy was unrelenting, but today he decided to listen to his body's call for rest. He woke up feeling fatigued, and for once he allowed himself the luxury of a day to recharge. Thoughts of reconnecting with Lily filled his mind. Their interactions lately had been strained, with both buried in work, but he missed her company. He remembered when they'd spend entire weekends together, just talking or exploring new places. Smiling, he thought today could be a fresh start. He sent Lily a quick text. "Hey, thought I'd surprise you with lunch today. Let's take a break together." Her response, though, felt colder than he'd hoped. "Busy with work. Maybe some other time." Ethan's heart sank slightly, but he reasoned that she was likely having a rough day, too. After all, running her boutique took as much energy as his consultancy did. Determined not to let this setback ruin his day, Ethan decided he'd surprise her with her favorite lunch anyway. Later in the day, he stopped by a local cafe, picking up her go-to meal and a small bouquet. Driving back home, he envisioned her face lighting up at the sight of the surprise lunch, hoping it might rekindle the closeness they once shared. His day off was turning out differently than he'd planned, but he remained optimistic. But as he pulled up to their house, a strange car parked outside caught his eye. It was sleek and unfamiliar, definitely not a friend's. At first, he dismissed it, thinking it could belong to a contractor or delivery person. However, the feeling of unease was hard to ignore. As he approached the door, he heard laughter, Lily's, interwoven with a man's voice that sounded unsettlingly familiar. Standing at the door, bouquet in hand, he felt his stomach churn. He told himself he was overreacting, but a gnawing suspicion urged him to step inside quietly. As Ethan entered their house, he moved cautiously, his footsteps barely audible. The laughter he'd heard from outside was now clearer. It was indeed Lily, but her tone wasn't one he recognized. She sounded carefree, almost flirtatious, something he hadn't heard in months. The man's voice, distinct and unsettling, became clearer too. That's when it hit him. It was Mark, their landlord. Ethan's grip on the bouquet tightened as he moved closer to the living room. Ethan observed them from behind the doorframe, feeling his heart pound in his chest. The sight before him made his breath catch. There, on their couch, sat Lily and Mark, far too close for comfort. Mark's hand rested casually on Lily's knee, his body language relaxed and intimate. Lily, instead of moving away, seemed comfortable, her laughter soft and familiar in a way that shattered Ethan's perception of their relationship. For a moment, Ethan felt as though he were outside his own body, watching from a distance. His mind raced, each thought cutting deeper than the last. How long had this been going on? Had she been playing him all this time? The cufflink he'd found on the windowsill that morning suddenly took on a new meaning. How many signs had he ignored? Summoning his composure, he stepped into the room. "Am I interrupting something?" he asked, his voice steady but laced with pain. Lily's face turned pale, and she shot up from the couch, eyes wide with shock. Mark, too, stiffened, removing his hand from her knee. "Ethan, it's not what it looks like," Lily stammered, her voice trembling, but the look in her eyes told him the truth. Ethan felt his heart shatter as he looked at her. Words failed him as he turned and walked out, leaving the bouquet and takeout on the table, a cruel symbol of what he'd hoped today would be. Ethan didn't go far. He stood on the front porch, fighting back tears as he processed the betrayal he had just witnessed. The love he had poured into their relationship, the sacrifices he had made, everything felt like a cruel joke. He paced back and forth, emotions raging. Every fiber of his being screamed to leave, but something inside him needed closure. After a few minutes, he walked back inside, determined to confront her. Lily was still sitting on the couch, staring at the floor, while Mark looked as though he'd rather disappear than face Ethan's wrath. "How long has this been going on?" Ethan demanded, his voice low but fierce. His eyes were locked onto Lily, who couldn't meet his gaze. Lily fumbled with her words. "Ethan, I'm so sorry. It just happened. It didn't mean anything." "Didn't mean anything?" Ethan repeated, his voice rising. "You've been seeing him here in our home and it didn't mean anything? Is that what I am to you?" Mark tried to interject, but Ethan silenced him with a glare. "Get out," he said firmly. "Leave, now." Mark didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed his jacket and made a hasty exit, muttering apologies that fell on deaf ears. Once they were alone, Lily broke down. "Ethan, please let me explain. I was lonely. You've been so distant, always at work. I didn't feel loved anymore." Ethan laughed bitterly. "So this is my fault? I was working to build a future for us, and this is how you repay me?" Lily's tears flowed freely, and she reached out to him, but Ethan pulled away. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you," he said, his voice cold. "Right now, I need space." Her face crumpled, but she nodded, grateful he hadn't asked her to leave immediately. She couldn't have known that this was the calm before the storm he was about to unleash. Over the next few days, Ethan maintained a veneer of calm. He allowed Lily to think he was considering reconciliation, even allowing her to stay at home, giving her a glimmer of hope that their relationship might survive this. But inside, he was seething. Every time he looked at her, memories of that betrayal replayed in his mind, each one fueling his resolve. Lily, oblivious to the storm brewing within him, did her best to make amends. She cooked his favorite meals, left him apologetic notes, and tried to initiate conversations about their relationship. Ethan responded with minimal engagement, giving her just enough to believe that forgiveness was possible. In reality, he was biding his time, plotting his revenge with meticulous detail. He spent hours at night going through her boutique's online platform, reviewing all the work he had helped her set up. He had access to her inventory, her customer lists, her social media accounts, all the tools she had relied on to grow her business. Slowly, he began gathering everything he needed to execute his plan. During the day, he kept up the act, even suggesting they go to counseling. Lily's relief was palpable. She believed their relationship could be saved. She had no idea that he was waiting for the perfect moment to pull the rug out from under her. He wanted her to feel secure, to believe they had a future, before he took everything away. One evening, when Lily left to visit a friend, Ethan decided it was time to begin. He accessed her website, deleting products one by one, erasing the customer database she had built painstakingly over years. With every click, he felt a grim satisfaction, knowing he was dismantling the business that meant so much to her. He drafted a cryptic message to her loyal customers, apologizing for the sudden closure and stating that the boutique would be shutting down indefinitely. His hands didn't tremble. His actions were steady and purposeful. He imagined the devastation Lily would feel when she discovered her life's work, her pride and joy, had been erased. When she returned that night, he said nothing, acting as though everything were normal. He could see the spark of hope in her eyes, the belief that they could repair what she had broken. Little did she know that by morning, everything she had worked for would be gone. The next morning, Lily awoke to a flurry of messages from her customers. Confused, she opened her laptop, her heart racing as she discovered her entire boutique had vanished. Her products, her customer list, her website, all gone. Panic overtook her as she tried to recover the files, but it was too late. Everything had been wiped. In desperation, she turned to Ethan. "My business. It's gone." Someone hacked it. Everything is gone. Ethan met her gaze with cold indifference. Maybe now you know how it feels, he said quietly, his voice devoid of sympathy. Her face crumpled as realization dawned. This was his doing, a calculated revenge to make her feel the same sense of betrayal she had inflicted on him. She fell to her knees, sobbing, but Ethan remained unmoved. The sight of her despair gave him a bittersweet satisfaction. He had loved her deeply, but that love had been shattered, replaced with a hollow sense of justice. In the weeks that followed, Ethan filed for divorce. He watched Lily struggle to rebuild her life, haunted by her actions and the consequences they had brought. The weight of betrayal still lingered, but for Ethan, each day brought a renewed sense of freedom. He no longer felt shackled by the hurt she had caused, finding solace
in the knowledge that he had found closure. Thank you for watching this story. Betrayal can come from those closest to us, but in the darkest moments we find our strength. Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories.
Steve Jones sat on the rear patio, gazing at the sunset over the ocean. He mused that they should have relocated here ages ago. The allure and serenity of this spot were enchanting. Here refers to a small island off the north coast of Cornwall. Throughout their 22-year marriage, Steve's wife, Claire, persistently suggested, persuaded, and eventually convinced him to move from London to this place, where she and her family had deep roots. Improved transportation and technology, along with COVID, finally enabled him to work remotely enough to make the move feasible. With visits to the city limited to once a month, Claire, who still lived in London, regularly returned to the island to reconnect with family, friends, and, most importantly, her mother. They purchased the house from Claire's cousin 2 years prior, but only made the move 6 months ago. In the interim, Claire utilized her visits to undertake repairs and use it as a home base. Following the completion of extensive construction, the house now faced west, overlooking the bay, offering Steve a breathtaking sunset view as he enjoyed a refreshing beer. Originally a farm, the property retained nearby meadows and orchards, with signs of recent tree planting, likely part of Claire's landscaping efforts the prior spring. Trees and orchards appeared to be prevalent across the island, prompting Steve to ponder whether they served to shield against the brisk sea winds or, more likely, to yield the beloved cider cherished by locals. He conceded it was a wise decision. Claire had been right. Life on the island operated at a distinct pace, revolving around tight-knit circles, many of which comprised Claire's relatives. Claire reveled in her return home, seemingly acquainted with everyone on the island. As an outsider, Steve perceived a certain aloofness from the locals, yet he appreciated their direct mannerisms. The collective unity displayed by everyone impressed him, leading him to speculate whether it stemmed from the self-reliance essential for a small island community's survival. Steve and Claire crossed paths at university, both pursuing degrees in business. Claire focused on marketing, while Steve delved into new technologies. Their bond blossomed, culminating in marriage shortly after graduation, with a mutual decision to settle in London for enhanced career prospects. Though married for 22 years, Steve still finds Claire stunning. While her hair gradually shortened, now styled in a pulled-back fashion with a touch of golden hue accentuating her natural blonde locks, he noticed her concern over the slight weight gain she experienced over the years. However, he cherished the subtle changes in her physique, her silhouette becoming fuller, her hips and bust embracing a more pronounced curve. Her eyes retained their familiar hue, blue-gray with specks of yellow in the irises. Unlike Steve, she never appeared disheveled or opted for sweatpants, maintaining a timeless appearance. He had never witnessed his wife so elated, fully immersed in island life and actively engaged in various committee endeavors. Her current undertaking involved coordinating a solstice festival. Their daughters, Nicole and Michelle, arrived shortly after their wedding, grew up, and pursued studies at Durham University, a factor influencing Steve and Claire's decision to relocate. Based on their social media activity, the girls seemed to be relishing university experiences to the fullest. Despite Nicole's penchant for procrastination, Steve remained confident they had ample time to complete all necessary tasks. He found solace in the island's history, often indulging in evenings at the local pub, listening intently to age-old fishing tales. Several antiquated books chronicled the island's history, housed within a small schoolhouse doubling as a library and village hall for social gatherings. Surveying the attic of their home for the first time, Steve hoped to uncover more insights into the island's past. Amongst the aged beds, furniture, and toys, he stumbled upon a weathered box containing a handwritten manuscript titled Tales from the Island, authored by Melissa Taylor, his wife's maiden name. Seating himself on a wicker stool, he perused the manuscript, admiring the elegant, swirling script detailing a blend of ancestral stories and personal experiences. Illustrations of trees captured Steve's interest as he skimmed through the faded yet evocative text, piecing together fragments of the narrative. The tradition's origins trace back to 1287, during the Plantagenet era, when the law of the first night, also known as jus primae noctis, became part of marriage licenses. Under this law, the ruling lord held the right to spend the initial night with any newlywed bride within his domain. Steve recalled a similar concept from the William Wallace movie featuring Mel Gibson, though he suspected it to be a myth adopted by Hollywood for added intrigue. As he delved deeper into the text, Steve learned of the groom's anguish caused by this practice. To preempt any potential retaliation, elder women spent a night with the groom, eventually evolving to one of the senior women sharing the groom's bed to ensure fairness for the couple. For 2.5 centuries, the plague ravaged English society, decimating populations, including on the island. Following a severe outbreak in 1622, concerns arose regarding the island's viability, leading to serious contemplation of its abandonment. Following these events, rumors circulated regarding partner swaps on April Fool's Day, linked to efforts to populate the island. Widows were encouraged to seek companionship among younger men. With the onset of the Great War, nearly all island men enlisted in the British Army's ranks. Many never returned, prompting adjustments to the island's customs to provide unmarried men heading to war with surrogate partners before conscription. This practice resurfaced, albeit to a lesser extent during World War II. The narrative then transitions to Melissa's experiences in the 1950s. Despite challenges like the influx of outsiders and displacement of locals, the tradition persists in certain families. Elders staunchly defend its value as a cultural practice. Married women who've raised children offer surrogacy to 18-year-old men, easing concerns about pureness loss and imparting marital wisdom. Divorce remains rare on the island. This tradition also mitigates adolescent pregnancies seen as communal service with rewards after years of child-rearing. It curbs empty nest syndrome and extramarital affairs. Melissa recounts her own surrogacy for an 18-year-old named Robert when she was 46, while her husband focused on business. Robert's reward for planting trees during the festival was time in Melissa's marital bed, symbolizing renewal. The text suggests that Melissa's husband was aware of the arrangement, but never broached the subject. She observed Robert's evolution from a timid adolescent to a confident man. Their initial encounter was brief and awkward, but Melissa provided comfort, gradually fostering closeness. Throughout the week, Robert's skills and self-assurance flourished. Melissa not only addressed physical aspects, but also conveyed her desires, emotions, and relationship dynamics. Steve marveled at the remarkable tale, pondering its authenticity. While historical references lent credence, the narrative seemed improbable. It could either be the author's creative invention or a means to justify her narrative. Months later, Steve contemplated his return to the city for work. With Claire's extensive shopping list, he opted to extend his trip by a day to reconnect with old friends. Timing his departure after the festival, he aimed to be back by the following Saturday. Claire welcomed the news, anticipating Steve's assistance with festival preparations and his willingness to tackle her shopping tasks. The festival day engaged the entire island, featuring children's games and sports during the day and evening festivities with dancing and drinks for adults. As the evening program commenced, Steve met some islanders he hadn't encountered before, including John Fraser, his wife Angela, and their son Jake, who seemed close in age to Steve's youngest daughter. Jake's formal handshake struck Steve as odd, but the moment passed quickly. Among the island's oldest families alongside the Taylors, the Frasers, Steve once again felt like an outsider. While Claire and the Frasers delved into familial connections later that evening, Steve noticed a group of young men casting admiring glances at Claire. He couldn't blame them. She looked stunning in her chosen summer dress, highlighting her ample bosom and shapely legs. Their persistent looks began to irk Steve. Just as he was about to intervene, Claire's mother intervened first, ushering them all back to the cider bar. Steve chuckled inwardly, noting the wariness the young men seemed to have toward Claire's mom. Diana, however, commanded respect, a formidable figure and leader of the Council of Elders. It was clear where Claire inherited her striking looks. Diana Taylor remained a striking woman, more akin to Claire's older sister than her mother. He returned to watch the dancing, which engaged people of all ages. Steve felt the cider's effects, but decided he could handle more. Everyone seemed to share the same mood, making it a challenge for him to serve himself. Upon his return, he realized Claire was missing and began scanning the area. To his surprise, he found her conversing with Jake Fraser, who had moved away as Steve approached. "What's going on?" Steve inquired. "Jake is interested in landscaping work. I was discussing options and costs," Claire explained. "Do we have work for him?" "Yes, and there's a tradition of planting and rejuvenating trees around the festival time, so it's perfect." The mention of trees triggered memories of a manuscript Steve had recently read. "So Jake will be planting trees?" "Yes, he can start next week." Claire observed Steve's reaction. "Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost," Steve replied slowly. "What will Jake receive in return?" "Money, of course, but we haven't settled on the amount yet." "Will there be other arrangements besides payment for his services? What are you implying?" Steve pressed. "So this has nothing to do with the island's traditions?" Claire retorted sharply. "What traditions? You know about the solstice tradition. Are you insinuating I'm planning to have an affair with Jake Fraser while you're away next week?" Claire broke into tears and fled, leaving Steve in shock. He started to doubt himself. What if he had wrongly accused Claire? He regretted drinking so much. His thoughts were muddled, making it hard to think clearly. He began ascending the narrow road toward their house, hoping a walk would clear his mind. It felt like the longest walk of his life. Perhaps he had misunderstood something or overreacted to the situation. Upon reaching home, Claire was nowhere to be found. Exhausted, he collapsed onto the sofa, succumbing to drinks and fatigue-induced sleep. The following morning, Claire still hadn't returned, leading Steve to suspect she might have spent the night with her lover. However, he suspected she was with her mother, a suspicion confirmed when Claire and Diana arrived at the door. Diana took charge of the conversation, berating Steve for upsetting Claire and insinuating he was never good enough for her. It was a barrage of words, difficult to keep track of, but the underlying message was clear. How dare he treat Claire that way? He listened quietly as Claire spoke, her eyes glistening with tears. Eventually, unable to endure it any longer, he raised his hand to halt her mother. "I have a straightforward question. Is there indeed such a tradition? And are you intending to sleep with Jake Fraser next week?" Claire turned to her mother with a defeated expression, and everything clicked into place for Steve. "Yes, Steve. Some old families still observe the tradition, or at least a part of it. The Frasers have requested its enactment, and we are obligated to adhere to it. I asked Claire to consider it. It encompasses everything related to a boy's coming of age. It's about education regarding how to treat women respectfully. It's not what you would consider lovemaking, nor is it an affair. This tradition, centuries old, has aided the island in surviving tough times. It's a vital societal obligation that we fulfill. It's the reason we have low youth crime rates, no divorces, just happy, tightly knit families. I'm sure you've noticed that yourself, Steve," he sighed. "So it's all true. Married women are entertaining eager young men for the greater good," Diana retorted. "Let's not be crass. You're an outsider and don't grasp the significance of this to us. It's deeply ingrained in every story we hear growing up here. If you were from here, you'd receive the same benefits at 18, making you a better man. I doubt you'd turn down such an offer, Steve. Nowadays, there aren't any ancient laws, plagues, or wars driving this. You do it because you find pleasure in it. Diana, care to share how many times you've fulfilled this role? With your charm, you've likely been sought after for numerous executions of the agreement. I imagine you've had quite a bit of enjoyment for weeks." Diana appeared momentarily speechless, but quickly regained her composure. "Yes, I've fulfilled my obligation several times, and I take pride in it, just as you should be proud of Claire's sacrifice. Please, Steve, allow Claire to proceed. You can't grasp how significant this is to us." Steve turned to his wife. "So you're willing to do this?" I believe so. I'm prepared to make this sacrifice. Like my mother said, I want to become integrated into society. My departure for university and marriage left many unhappy, as I didn't return here or fulfill the responsibilities others carried." Steve interjected, "So, this is a sacrifice? Wasn't this something you desired yourself?" "It seems odd given how elated you were about my move to London. You seemed thrilled." Claire blushed, then continued, I simply felt relieved that I could handle everything without affecting you, and I'm confident it won't affect me. I'm absolutely certain it won't impact our relationship in any way. Besides, engaging in closeness with another man, deceiving others, being aware of what occurred, and keeping your oblivious husband unaware. Maybe you're onto something." Claire and Diana winced at Steve's sardonic reply. Then Diana intervened. "Why don't we all take some time to cool off and discuss everything, now that everything is out in the open, as it should be, and nothing has transpired yet?" Claire remained at their residence, but communication between them was sparse. Steve couldn't comprehend why Claire was considering going through with this. He anticipated her abandoning the idea, yet she appeared fixated on the island's tradition, regardless of its impact on their relationship. Claire insisted that transparency would improve things. She vowed to be forthcoming with Steve, even if it led to challenging discussions. Steve found himself somewhat taken aback by Claire's unwavering confidence and insistence that such an arrangement wouldn't impact their relationship. Diana returned on Wednesday while Claire was out, leading Steve to suspect they had privately agreed upon a meeting time. "Can we have a talk, Steve?" Steve gestured toward the kitchen table, and they both sat down. "Firstly, I want to apologize. This shouldn't have occurred, and it's my responsibility, not Claire's," Steve responded. "Claire is fully capable of making her own choices, and it seems this decision has already been made. Despite my reservations, she loves you deeply and believes strongly in your ability as a couple to navigate this," Steve replied somberly. "Yet neither of you seem to grasp how deeply this affects me. It's a genuine betrayal. When I was 18, I wasn't here, and unlike everyone else, I didn't live my life with the understanding that this could happen to my wife." "I understand, Steve, and it must be incredibly challenging. It's hard to convey how differently we view this. We don't perceive it as infidelity. It holds significant importance to us, and Claire sees it as a means to reintegrate into the island community." After a brief silence, Diana continued, "What will you do if she agrees to this?" Steve sighed, reluctant to voice his thoughts, but did so nonetheless. "I won't tolerate it." Diana appeared to ponder the situation before speaking again. "What if there's a way to balance things out? Perhaps giving you the opportunity to experience what you missed when you were 18. Steve must have looked as bewildered as he felt. Diana continued, "I spoke with 2 other elders, and we reached an agreement that the elders would extend to you a similar arrangement as Claire's." Suddenly, a realization dawned on Steve. "Are you proposing that I engage in carnal relations with Helen Brown or Moira Fraser?" Memories of meeting these 2 women flooded Steve's mind. Helen, a widow from a young age, whom Steve presumed to be around his wife's age. With her long black hair and deep brown eyes, she maintained a slender figure and was undeniably attractive. Steve didn't know Moira Fraser well, but he knew she was happily married and related to the other Frasers. As the headmistress of a small school, Moira boasted reddish-blonde curly hair and a graceful figure, often showcasing ample cleavage. Steve lifted his gaze from his memories. "Yes, Steve, the elders are open to offering this, demonstrating the significance of this to us." Claire's involvement was not taken lightly. Despite the apparent temptation, Steve found the entire proposal ludicrous. "You're an exceptional woman, Diana, and also an elder. Aren't you also included in this arrangement?" Diana hesitated, unsure if Steve was serious. "If that's what you require, Steve, then yes, I consent. I won't be the one responsible for forsaking centuries-old traditions." Steve shook his head, astonished by Diana's willingness to go to such lengths. He dreaded having to explain this arrangement to his father and the authorities. "You know, Diana, some traditions have overstayed their welcome, and it's appropriate that they fade away," Steve remarked. Diana's smile vanished. "Our offer remains, Steve, and you won't regret it. I can assure you of that. Think it over carefully." When Steve recounted the incident to Claire, she already seemed aware of the elder's proposition, but Diana's involvement left her shocked and in tears. "I never imagined she would consider this. It's all too much. I won't go through with it, Steve. This has to stop." Steve felt a wave of relief, finally acknowledging how bizarre the whole situation was. "Thank goodness. I can't express how relieved I am." Claire cried and spent most of the night either apologizing or reiterating her love for Steve. The situation remained awkward and uncertain, with Steve still grappling with Claire's earlier intentions and her belief that the proposal was reasonable. On Friday, Diana returned, visibly angry about Claire's change of heart. accusing Steve of being a manipulative outsider who could never understand her. Steve grew weary of the accusations. "Why don't you be honest, Diana, and admit that for you, this is just a way to taunt your husband?" Diana was taken aback. "Fine. If you want the truth, we're enjoying ourselves. Having a young man in our bed, obeying our every command, is a dream come true. We lavish them with everything repeatedly, and everyone in the Fraser family is gifted." "Can you believe this?" Claire groaned. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Mom, please be quiet. You're ruining everything," Steve chuckled in response. "Let her speak. It's the most genuine thing I've heard from her," he added. Diana attempted to interject, but Claire intervened, urging her to leave and not return until she supported her decision. It was the first time Steve witnessed Claire standing up to Diana, and he couldn't discern who was more surprised when Diana stormed out of the house. In the ensuing weeks, the situation remained strained. Claire incessantly apologized for considering the arrangement and for asking Steve to accept it. She felt bound by tradition due to her mother's influence and hadn't considered the ramifications. Steve grappled with the dilemma of returning to the city for work. He couldn't delay it any longer, but the idea of leaving Claire on the island filled him with dread. Sensing his anxiety, Claire insisted on accompanying him, taking time off from her own job. The divide between her and her mother widened. They didn't speak, and Claire never broached the topic of the tradition again. After much deliberation and concern, Steve concluded that he needed to trust Claire and embark on the journey alone. Claire attempted once more to persuade Steve to let her join him, but he understood that she was engrossed in preparing a major marketing proposal and needed time to focus. Claire promised daily calls and frequent communication. Steve departed for London. The journey, involving ferry, taxi, train, and subway, left him exhausted, and he collapsed onto his hotel bed by 9 in the evening. He phoned Claire, who promptly picked up, and they conversed at length, sharing details of his trip and the city's changes. London seemed to be in a constant state of construction. Following their chat, Steve promptly drifted off to sleep, utterly drained. Despite a few taxing days at work, he felt rejuvenated. Being away from the island had provided clarity of mind. He began to ponder his relationship with Claire, mentally replaying their conversations. The man who once sought connection with a younger man seemed as distant from the woman he wedded as from the nurturing mother of his children. He sensed Diana's excessive influence over Claire and was relieved by their argument. Diana had crossed a line, and he hoped it marked the end of it. Yet, he couldn't reconcile Claire's actions and her certainty that the agreement wouldn't affect their relationship, a thought that continued to nag at him. Suddenly recalling the trees planted on their property the prior spring, Steve froze. Claire had been making regular visits to the island over the past year. A sense of dread washed over Steve as he considered who might have planted those trees. Perhaps her fervent advocacy this time stemmed from a need to justify her prior actions. He dialed Claire, and she picked up promptly. "Steve," he began, "doesn't Jake Fraser have an older brother?" There was a brief silence before Claire replied casually, "Yes, I believe he does." Despite our family's long history, there was a gap. "Right, Steve. His brother's name is Glenn," Steve continued. "He's around 19. After a moment's pause, Claire softly admitted, "Yes, that's correct. And it was Glenn who planted the trees last year." Silence followed. Steve pressed on. "And what did Glenn Fraser receive for this?" Claire snapped out of her reverie. "Just payment, Steve. Their family handles all the landscaping on the island." "So you're not entertaining Jake Fraser at this moment, are you?" Claire sighed. "No, Steve, I'm not entertaining anyone. You need to let go of this jealousy." Before she could say more, Steve hung up, ignoring subsequent calls from Claire. He needed time to process. Finally, on Friday morning, Steve answered the phone, catching Claire off guard. "Steve, thank goodness you picked up. I've been worried," she exclaimed. "Indeed. That's all," Steve replied tersely. "Of course, I love you more than anything. What time will you be back tomorrow? Should we discuss this?" Steve's calm demeanor unsettled Claire. "I won't be coming back. I'll stay here for a while," he declared. Panic surged through Claire. "Please don't do this. We need to resolve this as soon as possible." Steve's tone remained eerily composed. "True, but you didn't rush to London to do so, and you only called me during the day. I understand your evenings have been quite occupied." "Please, Steve, come home. I haven't done anything. It's just your paranoia. Come home and we can work through this," pleaded Claire. 5 days later, Steve arrived back on the island via ferry. Upon reaching the house, Claire and Diana were already there, evidently aware of his return. Claire attempted to embrace him, but Steve pulled away, prompting Claire to burst into tears while Diana looked livid. "Why are you here, Diana? This is between Claire and me," Steve demanded. "Am I correct in understanding that you two never fought?" Before Diana could reply, Claire interjected, "We did have a disagreement, but when you didn't come home, I needed support, and you weren't here." Steve furrowed his brow. "It's hard to believe that my mother-in-law would reconcile without getting her way. Given her efforts to reach an agreement, I doubt she would relent. I assume you both conspired to cover it up, as I refused to participate." Claire's eyes widened. "This is spiraling out of control, Steve. I haven't done anything," she insisted. Steve persisted. "So you both agreed to lie and conceal it?" "Because I refused." The argument ensued, going around in circles. Steve was convinced Claire had been unfaithful, but she vehemently denied it. Eventually, he retreated to the spare room, leaving Claire and Diana alone. The following day, Steve braced himself for a difficult conversation with his father-in-law, Bill Taylor, knowing it wouldn't be easy. Despite their usual rapport, Bill greeted Steve with a handshake, acknowledging he'd been anticipating their talk. They delved into tradition, and Bill disclosed that roughly 20 years ago, Diana had a brief affair with John Fraser. While he disapproved, he likened it to a youthful escapade he himself had enjoyed at 18. Steve carefully broached Diana's admission of recent rendezvous, querying if it was plausible. Bill was dismayed, confessing he had sensed something amiss, and his absence on a commercial fishing trip had provided ample opportunity. Steve inquired of Bill if he was aware of his daughter's actions. Bill acknowledged that Diana and Claire were very close, but attempted to keep him in the dark. "About a week before you left for London, they indicated that the plan was already set," he disclosed. Claire, seated at the kitchen table, couldn't meet Steve's gaze. "I can't believe my dad is going to divorce my mom, and we're the reason for it," she lamented. Diana made her own bed, asserting, "Your father would never condone this level of deceit and dishonesty. She continues to deny everything, despite John Fraser admitting the truth, and he's not the only one." After a prolonged silence, Claire murmured, "I know, that's why I feel I should tell you something." Steve remained silent. "I'm sorry, Steve, but I made an arrangement with Jake." The outburst Claire anticipated never materialized. "And last year with Glenn Fraser," she added quietly. Claire nodded in acknowledgement. Steve struggled to find words. "Please, Steve, this shouldn't alter our relationship. We've had 22 wonderful years together." "How can you say that? This changes everything," Steve retorted. "I'm deeply sorry, Steve. I felt compelled to fulfill family obligations," Claire explained. Steve seethed with anger. "That's absurd. You simply wanted to engage in relations with another man." "I did, and I enjoyed it so much that I did it again." "It wasn't like that. It was a duty, an obligation," Claire insisted. "So you didn't derive any pleasure from it?" Claire hesitated, aware of the precarious ground she was on. "It was mundane, unlike ours. Just physical, not carnal. It happened once. It won't occur again." "But it wasn't a one-time occurrence. You did it twice. You engaged in relations with both your brothers when they were barely 18. That makes you nothing more than promiscuous," Steve accused. Claire flinched at Steve's verbal assault. "I'm not like that. I was upholding a tradition. It's about guiding young men on their journey to manhood, that's all." "They were very appreciative," she defended. Claire realized she had made another error. As soon as she spoke, Steve erupted. "Oh, I bet they were damn appreciative. You claim it was a one-time thing, but how many times did you do this before they came of age? Tell me, how many times? If I were 18, I'd be damn eager to please. And having a woman at my disposal for the evening and night, that's at least 5 times a day, so maybe 35, once a week. It's unlikely to be just once." Claire couldn't deny it. Both Glenn and Jake were eager to please. Little training was required, though some patience was needed at the start of the week. She relished their sculpted bodies. Just as her mother had predicted, the encounters were thrilling. She particularly enjoyed teasing them with glimpses of stockings or cleavage, knowing that she would fully surrender to them that night. At one point, Jake even confessed his love for her. It was the only moment she realized how a week could impact her normal life and cherished marriage, and she wasted no time in clarifying the reality to Jake. Steve's tirade continued. "And what exactly does an 18-year-old need these days? I bet they had their sights set on you from day one, and you couldn't get enough, could you?" Claire wept. "It's not like that. It was meant to be a thrilling adventure. It was just physical. I know it stings your pride, but I only desire you. and you're the one who completes me." Steve became enraged. "I'd argue it's more about trust and vows than ego. What about your wedding vows? Does tradition override them? It's not ego when your life partner betrays you. And for what? Not for anything significant or with serious consequences, but for the sake of traditional lovemaking with some men." Claire blushed. "I understand you're angry and upset with me, but we're strong enough to overcome this. After Glenn, you didn't notice anything, but we grew closer. I thought it would be the same with Jake. I didn't know because I trusted the woman I loved selflessly. Believe me, I'll never do anything like that again." "Should I believe you?" "Trust you? You must be joking," Claire shot back, almost shouting. "You can, I swear. I'm truly sorry for hurting you. Think about the wonderful life we still have ahead. We can return to how things used to be." "Did you think about our wonderful life when you were scheming all this and lying on your back? No, I'd never have imagined this if I'd known the consequences. I'd never deliberately hurt you, but I did anyway." "I know. And I'm really sorry, and what do you think of it?" Claire was at a loss for words. "Clearly you don't grasp how I feel. You ripped out my heart and soul. How the hell can you fix this, Claire?" With that, Steve stormed off before he did something he would regret. He continued walking, attempting to clear his head, but even the beauty of the evening sunset failed to improve his mood. As he turned back towards the village, he was surprised to encounter Elder Helen Brown. Steve could barely manage a nod in return to her greeting. Helen smiled knowingly, acknowledging that their meeting was no coincidence. Observing Steve heading towards the cliff path, she anticipated catching up with him upon his return. Helen offered to sit on a rock ledge and cautiously inquired if Steve would share anything about his circumstances. Steve saw no reason to withhold anything and proceeded to divulge everything. Yet, speaking aloud failed to alleviate the weight burdening his shoulders. Helen listened attentively without interruption. Steve hesitated to mention Diana's proposition involving one of the elders engaging in carnal activity with him in exchange for Claire fulfilling her obligations. However, he decided to include it verbatim, considering Helen's involvement in the saga. Upon completion, Helen remained silent for a prolonged period before responding, "Steve, I never made such an offer. Diana never discussed any agreements with me or Moira. It's not something we would even consider. I suspect Diana was attempting to manipulate you into agreeing to extramarital relations to justify their plans." Steve was baffled by her response. Helen added, "Furthermore, these arrangements mostly vanished decades ago, and even then, it was only for the first night, never a week. Week-long arrangements were typically for household chores or planting, with one night of union at the end. Perhaps Melissa, Diana, and Susan acted out of necessity." Steve shook his head in disbelief. Just as he started to come to terms with his wife's actions, another shock emerged. Helen assured him that she would discuss the matter with Moira and take the necessary steps to strip Diana of her elder status. She acknowledged that it would be scandalous, as such actions had never occurred before, but deemed Diana's behavior unforgivable. Nowadays, elders are expected to engage in social activities and support the island's inhabitants. Helen gazed at Steve. "What's your plan?" Steve shrugged. "I can't get her to grasp the consequences, but I want her to feel what I'm feeling right now." They sat in silence until Steve noticed a faint smile playing at the corner of Helen's mouth. "What's amusing you?" he inquired. Helen's smile broadened as she proposed, "What if you stay with me for a week? Seriously, we won't let Claire and Diana in on it. We'll tell them I'm honored to accept the agreement offered on my behalf as an elder. That way, you give Claire a taste of her own medicine, and I get to needle Diana for dragging my name into this mess." Steve was intrigued but voiced concern. "Won't this injure your reputation? I'm still married, and people will talk." Helen dismissed his worry. "I couldn't care less about gossip. And truth be told, nearly the whole island already knows about your situation, Steve." The realization stung, but Steve's spirits lifted with a pleasant idea he shared with Helen. "Seriously, I'd love to plant some trees for you. It'll give Claire and Diana pause." They chuckled together and swiftly resolved all the details. Steve returned home and quickly packed his belongings. To Claire, he simply explained that upon reflection, he had decided to accept her mother's gracious offer regarding the island's elder, and given the circumstances, spending a week with another woman seemed quite reasonable. He left Claire in tears, pleading with him not to proceed. His time with Helen proved unexpectedly pleasant. She proved to be excellent company and a skilled cook. Steve busied himself with home improvements and even planted a few trees in the backyard. They also discussed Steve's predicament. He hoped this week would give Claire some insight into his feelings, but he soon noticed signs that Claire grasped the gravity of her actions. Reconciliation seemed out of reach. True to his promise, Steve refrained from closeness with Helen, though they came close a couple of times, not from lack of desire. Soon after, Claire confronted Helen at the village store, accusing her of having an affair with Steve. Helen responded with a sweet smile. "Claire, dear, you know well this isn't an affair. It's an arrangement, and it won't impact your marriage," Helen replied calmly, echoing Claire's own words. Claire persisted. "You can't do this. He's my husband, and you should know I'm fulfilling the offer made by your mother on my behalf. Who was it? Me, Moira, or even your mother for a week? Steve made his choice, and I'm bound to honor tradition. It could have been worse. He could have chosen Diana. I've promised to return him safe and sound, albeit a bit weary." Claire was taken aback. You old strumpet," Helen responded calmly. "I would have thought that term would be more fitting for someone who slept with 18-year-old boys behind her faithful husband." With that, Helen stormed off, leaving Claire speechless as the villagers in the shop watched. The next day, Claire, enraged and hysterical, attempted to kick down Helen's front door before Steve intervened. "Please, Steve, I'm so sorry. Come home. I'm just doing what you did." "Why are you so upset? As you said, this shouldn't concern us." "I had no idea. It's just cruel. It torments me. I can't stop thinking about you and that old woman, Steve." "Yes, it sounds familiar. Welcome to my world," he said curtly, slamming the door shut. Steve returned home the following week to a much quieter Claire. She started, "I can't believe you did this to me, but I can forgive you if you can. I understand how you feel about all this." "That's your perspective. You've only experienced part of it, not the deceit and lies. Our entire existence here is built on lies," Claire persisted. "We're still the same people, the same marriage. The same marriage that led you to bed other men. A marriage you ruined, and I still can't comprehend why. Are you truly that tired of me?" "It was never about you or boredom. If we can't go back, we can build something new. Let's look forward to all those retirement dreams, to the things we could have together. Travel, grandchildren. We can still do it all. We still love each other, no matter what. It's not over yet, Steve. I will do anything to prove my love for you." Steve remained in the house, occupying the spare room, grappling with daunting thoughts about what he would do with his life if he left Claire. He couldn't determine whether failure or abyss best described his prospects. It's simpler to stay, and he still loves her. Considering the consequences, he doubted Claire would repeat her actions. The island was serene, and he had envisioned traveling, investing years in planning his options and sharing those dreams with Claire. Did he truly want to abandon it all? Claire pondered how it had come to this. It was all so bewildering. When her mother proposed an agreement, she turned it down. Yet Diana persisted for months. Then she encountered Glenn Fraser at a dance. He was exceptionally good-looking and wonderfully polite. They danced together multiple times at social gatherings, and they hit it off. Diana shared details about her own arrangements and how thrilling they were. She portrayed it as a guilt-free romantic escapade and never considered it an affair. It was simply tradition. Despite this, she knew Steve didn't see it that way, so she kept everything hidden. If he never found out, it wouldn't cause him any pain. The week with Glenn was marvelous. During the day, he planted trees and spent evenings in her bed. He was quite nervous, but incredibly charming and eager to please. By the end of the week, he had become a skilled lover. His size and physicality, combined with patience and technique, made him quite adept. Claire proved to be an excellent teacher. The week filled her with confidence. She felt like she had rekindled her sensuality, which had dwindled during the years of motherhood. Was it tradition or just illicit lovemaking, as Steve suggested? She had to acknowledge it was both. But didn't she deserve a bit of satisfaction? After devoting 22 years to raising children and being a devoted wife, she was certain it didn't damage her relationship with Steve. Things had never been better. She loved him more than ever. And after that week, they started making love more frequently. Jake appeared even more attractive, stirring feelings of arousal at the prospect of sharing her bed with him. Steve, always astute, uncovered the tradition. Aunt Melissa's memoirs had unwittingly spilled the beans. Claire and her mother attempted to persuade Steve to agree, but he remained steadfast. Reflecting on it, Claire realized that her decision to deceive him was perhaps the worst she had ever made. Yet she remained confident that once the pain subsided, she could win Steve back. All she needed to do was remind him of the strength of their relationship and their shared aspirations for the future. He would surely want to stay together for the sake of their daughters and future grandchildren. This argument could work in her favor. To Steve's surprise, their daughters arrived on the island just 2 days later. Nicole wasted no time in rebuking Steve for his alleged mistreatment of her mother, dismissing the notion of living apart as absurd. Meanwhile, Michelle appeared to be observing quietly, awaiting further details. A slight smile played on Claire's lips, suggesting she believed Steve had not noticed her manipulations and lies over the years. Apparently, she assumed he would shield their daughters from knowledge of her actions, prioritizing their protection, as always. However, all of Steve's doubts were dispelled. Claire had misjudged the situation entirely. Steve raised his voice in a manner his daughters had never witnessed before. "Your mother was involved with younger men for 2 weeks. They were younger than both of you. She doesn't seem to grasp that. I won't condone this behavior," Steve asserted. Claire promptly refuted the claim, insisting that Steve had misinterpreted the situation and that the men were merely doing landscaping work. Steve had to concede that she was skilled. She almost convinced him. Both daughters sensed that something was amiss, though their father's suspicions seemed far-fetched. Perhaps he was beginning to lose touch with reality. While Steve might agree with that notion, he suggested involving Grandpa Bill or the elders to arbitrate the truth. Claire feigned a fainting spell, though it wasn't very convincing. All three stared at her, puzzled, awaiting an equally poorly executed recovery. Steve regarded her with disdain. "I can't trust you anymore, it's over. There's no going back or forward with flashing lights. How will you face yourself in the mirror knowing you betrayed me? Nothing can undo that. And how will I feel, accepting this? We need each other, Steve. We've always relied on each other, making us both stronger. I'm right for you. Deep down you still know it. Don't throw away your life to punish me. I can handle this, Claire, but I won't let you ruin me. I'll forge a new path. We all must face our choices and stay true to ourselves. You'll have to live with the fact that you cheated, lied, and discarded what we had. I'll live with leaving the woman I loved, but you're not who I thought you were, not the kind and good person I fell in love with. I wish I could return her, but not you." Steve departed the island with his daughters, opting to rent an apartment closer to their university. The girls were stunned by their mother and grandmother's actions. He never returned. Before leaving, he set fire to the trees in the orchard. Claire watched the orange glow with tears in her eyes. Bill assisted Steve in selling the house since Claire lacked the funds to maintain it. The divorces of Diana and Claire created a scandal, sealing the fate of the remaining tradition. Diana was the first to be ousted from her elder position. Both she and Claire became social pariahs. No woman trusted or befriended them, yet they defiantly remained on the island. Several months later, Helen Brown resigned as an elder. Island residents noticed her spending less time there, eventually visiting for only a few weeks each year. When questioned, she revealed she now resides with her family near a place called Durham.
Hello, everyone. Let me start with a brag. Yeah, I know, not the most humble way to begin, but you'll get why soon. I'm 40 years old, and in the last few months, I've been in bed with not one, not two, but 3 beautiful women. I mean, who can honestly say they've done that? And I'm not talking about flings or some fantasy scenario. This was real. Each of them beautiful, sexy, and all part of the plan. Now, before you roll your eyes and think I'm just blowing smoke, let me clear something up. This wasn't about being some stud or having some midlife crisis. It was about revenge. Sweet, calculated revenge. On my wife. Yeah, you read that right. This isn't one of those feel-good stories where I find enlightenment or some kind of deeper understanding of life. No, this is messy, real, and unapologetic. If you're curious about how it went down, well, buckle up. It's a ride, and I'm not holding back. Let me take you back to the start of it all. I'm just an average guy. Nothing flashy, no millionaire lifestyle, or anything like that. I've been married for 11 years, together with her for even longer. We've got 2 kids, a mortgage, a pretty standard life. If you asked me before all this happened, I would have told you our marriage wasn't perfect, but it wasn't broken either. I thought we were solid. You know, like that old pair of shoes you've had for years. They're a bit worn, but still hold together. Turns out I was wrong. Really fucking wrong. The night Everything changed started out like any other. I came home from work, tired but looking forward to a quiet evening. She made dinner that night. Something nice, like she was trying to put in some extra effort. She had that look on her face, the one that said she wanted to talk, but I wasn't ready for the bomb she was about to drop. We sat down at the table. Kids were already asleep, and I dug into the meal like any other night. But right as I'm getting comfortable, she starts talking. Not the usual small talk about our day or how work was, but real heavy shit about our marriage. Out of nowhere, she starts going on about how things feel stagnant, like our marriage had lost its spark. Her words were like tiny daggers pricking at me, but I tried to stay calm. Now, don't get me wrong, I wasn't oblivious. I knew things weren't as exciting as they were when we first got together. But hell, that's normal, right? After a decade together, 2 kids, and full-time jobs, things tend to slow down. But in my mind, that didn't mean it was over. It just meant we needed to put a little more effort in. Marriage is work, but apparently, I was the only one who thought that way. I sat there, listening to her ramble on about how bored she was, how our lives had become so predictable. I was still halfway through my dinner, fork in hand, when she dropped the real bomb. She said she wanted to open our relationship. I froze. The food in my mouth might as well have been made of rubber, because suddenly I couldn't taste a damn thing. I kept my face as neutral as possible, but inside, I was screaming. I expected her to say we should go to counseling, maybe talk about spicing things up, or hell, even a discussion about separation. But this? I didn't see this coming. She continued, oblivious to the rage building up inside me. I don't see it as cheating, she said casually, like she was talking about trying a new diet. Just for a short while. We both need some space, some freedom. Freedom? The nerve. She was sitting across from me, practically giving me a sales pitch about how she could go screw someone else guilt-free. And the way she said it, like it was no big deal, like this was just what normal couples do when they hit a rough patch. She wanted to have her cake and eat it too, to keep the comfort and stability of marriage while getting to fool around without consequence. I didn't say a word. I just kept eating, chewing slowly, nodding here and there like I was considering her proposal. In reality, I was holding back the urge to flip the table and storm out. But something clicked in that moment. As she went on and on about how this could help our marriage, I realized something. It was already dead. Our marriage was a corpse, and she just hadn't admitted it yet. If your wife asks for an open relationship, it's over. She's already checked out emotionally, mentally, hell, probably physically too. What she was really asking for wasn't a break. She had already found someone. I could feel it in the way she was so eager to justify it. Some guy was already in her head, or worse, her bed, and she was trying to make it legit. But instead of blowing up, instead of confronting her right there, I stayed cool. I agreed. Yeah, I fucking agreed to her stupid plan. Why? Because I knew I could play the long game. I knew she thought she'd won. That she'd just secured her hall pass to screw around while I sat at home, like some clueless chump. But what she didn't know was that I had my own plans. If she wanted an open relationship, fine. I'd let her think she was in control. But I'd get my revenge in ways she couldn't even imagine. So yeah, I agreed. I smiled, took another bite of my now tasteless dinner, and said, you know what? Maybe you're right. And that's how it all began. That night, after our little open relationship dinner chat, I couldn't sleep. She was next to me, knocked out, wearing those earplugs and that damn eye mask she swears helps her sleep. I had to laugh a little. Here she was, thinking she was slick, but she had no idea what I was about to do. We never used to hide anything from each other. At least, that's what I thought. We shared everything. Phones, passwords, the whole deal. So, when I slipped my hand under her pillow to grab her phone, I was really hoping she hadn't changed her password. I took a deep breath, tapped in the code, and boom, it unlocked. I felt a strange rush of excitement and anger all at once. How glad I was that she hadn't changed it. She really thought I wouldn't catch on. The first thing I did was check her messages. I was shaking a little, I won't lie. My mind was racing with a mix of rage and dread about what I was going to find. And it didn't take long. Right there in the middle of the chat app was the idiot she was about to cheat with. Some pretty boy with a smug profile picture, probably thinking he'd gotten himself some easy side action with my wife. The messages? Oh, they were very frank. Let's just say if she hadn't physically cheated yet, it was only a matter of time. The way they were talking, the way she was responding, it was clear as day. She was already gone mentally. Honestly, does it even matter if she hasn't done the deed yet? Betrayal is betrayal. And for me, emotional cheating is just as bad as the physical stuff. And judging by the pictures and emojis they were sending, it wasn't going to stay emotional for long. I took screenshots, saved his Instagram profile, and sent everything to myself just in case I needed proof later. By the time I was done, I had enough ammo to blow this whole thing wide open. But I wasn't ready for that yet. I had to play it smart. So what did I do next? I called in reinforcements. I dialed up a couple of my friends. I knew they'd be pissed I was calling in the middle of the night, but this couldn't wait. I needed them on board with what I was planning, and I needed them now. One by one, I woke them up, told them to meet me at the park. No questions, just show up. We all arrived at almost the same time. It was late, probably around 1 or 2 in the morning. So the park was empty, just a few streetlights casting long shadows across the grass. They looked confused at first, maybe a little annoyed, but as soon as they saw the look on my face, they knew something serious was going down. "What the hell, man?" one of them asked, rubbing his eyes. I got straight to the point. I laid it all out for them. The dinner, the open relationship, the messages I'd found. They didn't say much at first, just stood there listening, but I could tell they were as shocked as I had been. When I showed them the screenshots, their disbelief turned into anger. "What are you going to do?" one of them asked, eyes wide. I told them my plan. It wasn't fully fleshed out yet, but I had the basics in mind. I needed to get ahead of this. I needed to make sure that when this all blew up, I'd be the one holding the cards, not her. But I needed their help to pull it off. At first, they thought I was nuts. I could see it in their faces. What I was proposing was risky, maybe even a bit over the top. But after some discussion, and after a few adjustments to the plan, they were on board. We were all in agreement. This had to be handled swiftly and smartly, no half measures. By the time we left the park, I felt a strange mix of relief and dread. On one hand, I had my plan. I had my friends backing me up. But on the other hand, I knew there was no turning back now. What I was about to do would change everything, and there was no room for second thoughts. I made it back home, snuck back into bed next to her, and lay there for a while, staring at the ceiling. The fear started creeping in. What if this all went wrong? What if she found out what I was planning before I could pull it off? But then I thought about those messages, about her smug, carefree attitude, and it wiped the fear away. This had to be done. The next morning, as soon as the sun peeked through the blinds, I was wide awake, my mind racing. I couldn't wait any longer. The previous night's revelation still burned fresh in my head, and I wasn't about to sit around playing the clueless husband. I needed to act, and I needed to do it now. Without hesitation, I grabbed my phone and called a divorce lawyer. It didn't matter that it was early. If this guy was as good as his reviews said, he'd understand why I was calling at the crack of dawn. When he picked up, I didn't bother with pleasantries. "I want to file for divorce," I said, my voice steady but sharp. "My wife's cheating on me, and I need to start drawing up the documents as soon as possible." There was a brief silence on the other end. Maybe he was surprised by how direct I was. Maybe he wasn't. Either way, he quickly got down to business, asking for some basic information and explaining the steps we'd need to take. He said something about gathering evidence, but I cut him off. "Don't worry about that," I told him. "I've already got plenty of it." The lawyer scheduled me for a meeting that afternoon to start the paperwork. As I hung up, I felt a surge of adrenaline. This was real now. I wasn't just some guy catching his wife in an emotional affair. I was about to end a marriage. And as much as it hurt, I wasn't going to let her win. Not by a long shot. While I was busy locking down the legal side, the rest of my plan was already in motion. You see, this wasn't just about a divorce. If that was all I wanted, I could have packed my bags and walked away. No, I was in this for revenge. I wasn't going to let her get away with what she was doing so easily. My friends had tracked down the guy, the one my wife was planning to cheat with. It hadn't been hard. The idiot's Instagram was wide open, full of photos of him living some fake, wannabe influencer lifestyle. Expensive watches, flashy cars, pictures with models who probably didn't even know his name. Classic loser trying to look more important than he really was. And guess what? The moment my friends confronted him, the guy folded. I had expected some resistance, maybe a little back and forth, but this guy was nothing but a spineless coward. I didn't even need to be there. He gave up everything without so much as a threat. Apparently, he wasn't as bold in real life as he was behind a screen. I swear, man, I didn't know she was married, he babbled, probably thinking he could talk his way out of it. My friends didn't even have to raise their voices. They told him exactly what was going on, that he was caught in the middle of something way bigger than he realized. And he practically begged for a way out. I'll give him this. He knew when he was beat. He didn't try to run, didn't get defensive. He realized that messing with a married woman wasn't just going to blow up in his face. It was going to destroy his life if he wasn't careful. So I gave him an option. He could either disappear and never contact her again, or he could become my little informant. I didn't want him beaten up or anything crazy. That wasn't the point. Sure, I was pissed off, but this wasn't just about him. This was about her. If she didn't want to cheat, this guy wouldn't even be in the picture. So, instead of wasting my energy on him, I turned him into a tool. He became useful. From that point on, every little thing he and my wife planned came straight back to me. Their secret rendezvous? I knew about it. Their flirty texts? I had them all saved. My friends kept tabs on him, and he kept me in the loop. I made it clear, if he even thought about warning her, he'd regret it. And just like that, he became my pawn. He fed me information, and in return, he got to keep his face intact and his life relatively unscathed. Then came the day of their big meeting. The day she thought she was being so clever, sneaking off for the weekend. It was a Friday afternoon when she casually mentioned over breakfast that she'd be going to her parents' house for a few days. I could see right through her. That fake, nonchalant tone, like she was just planning a quiet family visit. But I knew exactly where she was going. I'm going to spend the weekend with my parents, she said, sipping her coffee like it was no big deal. I just smiled, playing the clueless husband she thought I was. Oh, that's nice, I replied, trying not to choke on my own amusement. Give them my regards. She smiled back, probably thinking she'd gotten away with it, that she could go off and do whatever she wanted while I stayed home, like some oblivious fool. But inside, I was already setting the next phase of my plan in motion. The moment she left the house, I was ready. It was time to move from defense to offense. The real game was just about to begin. As soon as my wife left, I knew everything was about to unfold exactly how I wanted. The moment the door closed behind her, my heart was pounding, but not out of fear, out of anticipation. I wasn't just playing the victim here. I was in control. I grabbed my phone, texted my friends, and told them it was time. A half hour later, they pulled up outside with the party in tow. Booze, laughter, and 3 younger girls who were more than willing to liven things up. The energy shifted the moment they walked in, like the air in the house changed, as if this was the turning point. And in a way, it was. We wasted no time. The drinks flowed freely, and the conversations got louder and more playful as the alcohol did its job. We were laughing like idiots, throwing back shots, and toasting to the most ridiculous things. It felt surreal. These girls, all in their 20s, brought a kind of youthful chaos that I hadn't felt in years. They were flirty, carefree, and didn't give a damn about anything except having fun. The more we drank, the more I could feel the weight of everything lifting off me, even if just for a little while. And then, in the middle of it all, I felt that buzzing thrill deep down, because I knew something my wife didn't. Her little boyfriend wasn't showing up. He had blocked her, probably too afraid of what might happen if things got messy. I had orchestrated that part too. He was my puppet, and he didn't even realize it. While she thought she was off to enjoy a secret weekend rendezvous, I knew she'd be turning around sooner than later, pissed off and probably humiliated when he ghosted her. She'd have no choice but to come back home. But until then, I was going to enjoy myself. The girls, now tipsy and laughing hysterically, suggested we move things to the bedroom. The tension in the air had changed, playful and charged. I could feel my own inhibitions slipping away with each shot I took. Why not? This was the revenge she never saw coming. We headed upstairs, one of them tugging on my arm, leading me toward the bedroom like it was all some kind of wild game. Inside the bedroom, things escalated quickly. The girls were giggling, taking off their tops as if it was the most natural thing in the world, and the next thing I knew, I was joining in piece by piece. It felt surreal, the warm haze of alcohol, the thrill of the moment, the sense of freedom. I'd spent so long being the loyal husband, the dependable guy who worked hard, provided, and was always there, but this was something else. It was like being let loose after years of restraint, and I didn't care about anything but the moment. As we got undressed, the feeling of revenge burned hotter inside me. I was enjoying it, letting go, wrapped up in the reckless abandon of it all. The three of them, younger, energetic, and completely uninhibited, made the whole thing feel like I was in some kind of alternate reality. I won't lie, it was exhilarating. The kind of sex that makes you forget everything else, where nothing else matters but the feeling, the rush, the heat of the moment. And then, just when I thought I was completely lost in it, I heard a sound, her voice, cutting through the haze. "What the hell is going on here?" she screamed. I didn't even hear the front door open. I didn't hear her come up the stairs. But there she was, standing in the doorway, her face contorted in shock, disbelief, and rage. Her eyes scanned the room, taking in the sight of me in bed with three women, half naked, the whole room reeking of booze and bad decisions. I paused for a second, but only long enough to turn my head toward her with the biggest, most sarcastic smile I could muster. "Oh, this?" I said, my voice dripping with mockery. "It's just a free relationship, dear. You know, like you wanted. By the way, how were your parents?" Her face turned from red to pale in a matter of seconds. I could see the realization hit her like a truck. She knew. She knew that I had planned all of this. And the fact that I had turned the tables on her like this, it destroyed her. I could see it in her eyes. She lost it. In a furious frenzy, she lunged toward the bed, ripping the girls off of me one by one, her hands shaking with anger as she threw their clothes at them and screamed for them to get out. The girls, giggling and stumbling from the alcohol, didn't even put up a fight. They gathered their things as quickly as they could and left, half-dressed, their laughter echoing down the stairs and out the door. To them, it was just some wild night that had gone a little sideways. When the girls were gone, she collapsed onto the edge of the bed, her hands covering her face as the sobs began. And not the quiet, soft kind of crying. The full-on, ugly, heaving sobs that shake your whole body. She couldn't control it. She didn't know what to do, and honestly, I didn't care. I calmly got dressed while she sat there, breaking down beside me. I didn't rush. I took my time, putting on my clothes, buttoning my shirt, adjusting my belt. Once I was done, I sat down next to her on the bed. I didn't feel sorry for her, not anymore. This was her doing her choice. She had pushed us here, and now she was paying the price. "How was your date?" I asked, my tone almost casual. She looked up at me, her eyes red and puffy, the tears still streaming down her cheeks. That's when it hit her. She knew I had done this. She knew I had set her up, that I had planned the whole thing. She didn't have to say it. The look in her eyes said it all. She opened her mouth to say something, but I cut her off. "Don't bother," I said, my voice calm but firm. "A lawyer's going to call you tomorrow. We're done. I'm filing for divorce." I stood up, looking down at her one last time. There's no point in fighting or yelling. It won't change anything. What's done is done. And just like that, I walked out of the room, leaving her there to cry. No more arguments, no more drama. I was done with it all. She made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. The next day, after everything that had happened, I knew I needed to clear my head and talk it out with my friends. We'd been through a lot together over the years, but this was a new level of crazy. I texted them in the morning, and they all agreed to meet at our usual spot, the local bar where we'd spent countless nights shooting the breeze and sharing stories. But today, the story was all mine. When I walked into the bar, they were already there, seated around our usual table, beers in hand, and grinning like they knew exactly what was coming. As soon as I sat down, one of them leaned forward and said, "All right, man, we've been dying to hear how it went down. Don't leave out a single detail." I didn't need much encouragement. I started from the beginning, telling them everything from the moment my wife left the house, thinking she was going off to her affair, to the moment I knew her lover had blocked her, leaving her to come home to an unexpected surprise. My friends were glued to every word, laughing and shaking their heads in disbelief as I recounted the scene in the bedroom, the booze, the girls, and of course, the grand finale, my wife walking in on me in the middle of the act. Wait, one of my buddies interrupted, barely able to contain his laughter. She just walks in, and you're like, "Oh, hey, it's a free relationship? Man, that's gold." I couldn't help but laugh too. Yeah, pretty much. She froze at first, didn't know what to do, and then went absolutely ballistic. I swear, the look on her face was priceless. She started screaming and throwing the girls out of the house, like she hadn't just suggested an open relationship a few days before. Another friend, shaking his head in disbelief, took a swig of his beer. "Damn, dude, you pulled that off perfectly. I'd have paid good money to see that." The laughter around the table grew louder as I continued with the story, explaining how, after she kicked the girls out, she sat on the bed crying, completely broken, and how I, calmly and without any drama, told her that a lawyer would be calling her the next day about the divorce. One of the guys, who was quieter than the rest, leaned back in his chair, smirking. "You know, I've got to say, I envy you a little. 3 girls at once? And she had to walk in and see it? That's the ultimate revenge." I just shook my head, still grinning. Yeah, it was definitely something. But honestly, I wasn't even doing it for that. It wasn't just about screwing around or even getting revenge, really. It was about showing her that she didn't get to pull the strings anymore, that she wasn't the one in control. There was a pause at the table as they nodded, absorbing the weight of what I was saying. Revenge had been part of it, sure, but it was also about reclaiming my own dignity after she had shredded it with her lies and betrayal. I raised my glass, making eye contact with each of them. "I gotta thank you guys. Seriously, you had my back through this whole thing. Without you, I don't know how I'd have handled it. Everyone deserves friends like you." They clinked their glasses with mine, and for a moment, there was a sense of quiet solidarity. These guys had been with me through thick and thin, and I wouldn't have made it through this mess without them. We finished our beers, and I started talking about the divorce process. The crazy part? The divorce wasn't even that dramatic. After everything that went down, I think my ex just realized there was no fight left. It was like she knew she'd lost, and there was no point dragging it out. One of them raised an eyebrow. "No screaming matches or last-minute drama?" I shook my head. Nope. It was shockingly calm. We divided the property pretty evenly. I wasn't out to take everything from her. What would be the point? It wasn't worth the hassle. The house, the cars, all of it got split without much argument. I think she was just too tired to fight anymore. And honestly, I didn't have the energy for it either. They all nodded. They got it. We'd all seen or heard of divorces that dragged on for years, with both sides trying to destroy each other. But in my case, it was like we both knew the game was over. There was no use in pretending anymore. She signed the papers, and that was that. "So what now?" one of my friends asked, leaning forward. "You got your freedom back. What are you going to do with it?" I smiled, but there was a hint of tiredness behind it. "I don't know, man. I'm just focusing on moving forward. I've spent enough time looking back, trying to figure out where things went wrong. I think it's time to just let it all go and start fresh." We spent the rest of the night drinking, laughing, and sharing stories, but the weight of what had happened lingered. By the time I left the bar, I felt lighter than I had in years. There was a sense of closure, of having finally put an end to a chapter of my life that had been dragging on for far too long. And now, to anyone reading this, I want to thank you for sticking around to hear my story. It's not an easy thing to go through, but I'm here to tell you that you can come out the other side, no matter how messy things get. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that you have to pay attention. Don't get so comfortable that you stop seeing the signs. Look at your spouse. Really look. Don't let things fall apart without noticing. And if they do, don't be afraid to take control of the situation. Trust me, you don't want to end up like I did, finding out the hard way. Update. It's been a little over a year since everything went down, and I figured it's about time to give you all an update on where my life's at now. Looking back, I can hardly believe how much has changed. It's strange. When you're in the middle of the chaos, it feels like life is falling apart. But now it feels like things are finally coming together in ways I never expected. First off, the divorce done, over and in the past. It was the best decision I could have made, and I don't regret a single moment of it. The whole process was surprisingly smooth, given how ugly things could have gotten. I've heard stories about divorces that drag on for years, with constant court battles and fighting over every little thing. But in my case, after that final confrontation, my ex seemed too tired to put up much of a fight. Maybe she realized there was no point anymore, or maybe she just wanted out as much as I did. Either way, we split the house, the cars, the money, and that was it. Clean break. I got what I needed, and she got what she deserved. Now let's talk about what really matters. Life after the storm. It's been a whirlwind, but in the best way possible. After the divorce, I made a conscious decision to focus on myself for the first time in years. I'm not just talking about the usual go to the gym, get in shape stuff. Though yeah, I did that too. It's amazing what a little freedom and motivation could do for your fitness. I lost some weight, put on some muscle, and honestly, I'm in the best shape I've been in since my 20s. But the physical stuff? That's just the surface. The real change happened on the inside. For the first time in a long time, I started thinking about what I wanted out of life. What kind of future did I want to build for myself? Now that I wasn't tied down by a toxic relationship, it wasn't an easy question to answer at first. I had to sit with myself and figure out what I really cared about, what I was passionate about. One of the biggest surprises? My career. I threw myself into work, not just as a distraction, but as a way to reinvent myself. The funny thing is, as soon as I stopped holding myself back and started taking risks, doors began to open. I had an idea for a side business, something I've been thinking about for a while, but never had the guts to pursue. I won't get into too many details, but let's just say it's a tech-related venture, something I've been passionate about for years, but always put on the back burner because of, well, life. After the divorce, I took the leap and started putting serious time and energy into making it happen. It wasn't easy at first. There were a lot of late nights, self-doubt, and wondering if I was just wasting my time. But slowly, things started to come together. I built a small team, got some investors on board, and before I knew it, the business was taking off. A year later, we're not just surviving, we're thriving. I'm not saying I'm a millionaire or anything, but the success I've had with this has given me a sense of pride and purpose I haven't felt in years. I even made a few headlines in local business news. Nothing huge, but it felt good to get some recognition for all the hard work. And the best part? I'm doing this on my own terms. No one to answer to but myself. That's a feeling I never thought I'd experience after being stuck in such a suffocating marriage for so long. On the personal side, life has been good. Better than good, actually. I've reconnected with old friends, made some new ones, and most importantly, I've learned how to enjoy my own company again. For a while after the divorce, I stayed single on purpose. I wasn't looking for anything serious. I needed time to heal, to get my head straight, and to figure out who I was without being someone's husband. But eventually, someone came along, as these things tend to happen. We met through mutual friends, nothing planned or expected, and we clicked. She's amazing, smart, funny, independent. The best part? She's not looking for anything from me except honesty and a good time. No drama, no baggage. It's refreshing, to say the least. I'm taking things slow this time around, though. I'm not in a rush to jump into anything serious, but for the first time in a long time, I feel optimistic about where things could go. As for my ex-wife, well, from what I've heard through the grapevine, things haven't exactly gone well for her. She's been through a few relationships since our divorce, none of which seem to have stuck. I don't wish her ill. Well, not anymore at least. I'm past that now. If anything, I just hope she figures out whatever it is she's looking for, though I suspect she never will. People like her rarely do. Looking back, it's wild to think about how much my life has changed in just over a year. If you told me a year ago that I'd be where I am now, running a successful business, in great shape, and dating someone new, I probably wouldn't have believed you. But here I am. And if there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that sometimes you have to lose everything to find yourself. To anyone reading this, especially if you're going through something similar, just know that it gets better. It doesn't seem like it at first, but trust me, it does. You just have to hang in there, take control of your life, and not be afraid to make the tough decisions when the time comes. So yeah, I guess you could say life's pretty damn good right now. And I plan to keep it that way.
I realized it was time to wrap things up and leave the master control booth before someone showed up to shut me down. If I acted quickly, I could switch off the live assist mode and return the system to its fully automated broadcast mode. Our local TV audience had seen enough for the night. Once I had the system running normally again, I could leave and grab a drink. I really needed one. I also understood that there would be consequences to face. Consequences at home and from the general manager and FCC once they pieced it all together and came after me. But I was already feeling like I was in a bad situation, so I didn't care anymore. Like I said, I needed a drink. I headed to Frankie's on Roswell Road, a popular local sports bar, and ordered a beer. I sat there watching the end of the Monday night football game while having a few more beers. There was a lot of chatter in the bar, and I knew what it was about. I couldn't catch everything, but I heard enough to know I had accomplished my goal. I had stirred up conversation. Luckily, nobody pulled me into their discussions, so I drank alone in silence while witnessing the Saints dominating the Falcons. By the time 10:30 p.m. rolled around, I was feeling numb. The game had ended, and my team had lost. New Orleans 23, Atlanta 3. It seemed like the Saints were particularly motivated, perhaps because it was their first game back in their stadium since the hurricane, and they completely outplayed the Falcons. Our station aired the game alongside ESPN because we were one of the teams involved. I inquired with the bartender about leaving my car in the parking lot overnight, and he agreed it was a wise decision given my condition. Recognizing my state, he arranged for a cab since I resided just a short distance away in a pleasant residential area of Sandy Springs. So, that's pretty much the conclusion of the story, and I suppose I should begin at the start to give you a clear picture of how I ended up in this situation. My name is Richard Head, but my friends call me Dick. I work as a broadcast engineer for WBDK, a local CBS affiliate in Atlanta, Georgia. I hold a graduate degree from MIT in electrical engineering and computer science, and I also obtained a second degree in broadcast technologies. Needless to say, I'm highly qualified in my field and have held several challenging positions. I've been working in the industry for 22 years, with stints at various television stations along the East Coast, before settling in Atlanta for the past 5 years. If you're curious about my appearance, I'm 46 years old with dark hair that's graying at the temples. I've never felt the need to conceal the gray, but I do apply a bit of dye to my small mustache to keep it from showing any signs of gray. I stand at 6 3 inches and weigh around 190 pounds, although I haven't stepped on a scale in quite some time. I'd say I'm moderately attractive, though I wouldn't compare myself to Mel Gibson or Richard Gere. You'll notice I didn't mention any younger actors, primarily because I'm not familiar with many of their names, and also because I'm not in the same age bracket, so it wouldn't be relevant. Anyway, I consider myself good-looking, but I'm not the type you'd see in a romance novel. My wife Sharon and I have been married for 22 years, and we have 2 daughters, Melanie and Stephanie. Melanie is married, while Stephanie is a senior in college. Sharon stands around 5 inches tall, weighing no more than 135 lbs, with long blonde hair that reaches her shoulders. She's incredibly attractive, with a figure that catches attention, and she's one of the sweetest women I've ever known. It's hard to find someone who doesn't like her. For the past 18 months, Sharon has been working as a secretary for our pastor, Reverend Bob Shelter. Now, on to the story. Last Friday, I had some extra time for lunch and decided to surprise Sharon by taking her out to lunch. I parked near the side entrance of the church offices due to the rain. When I arrived, she wasn't in her office, but I decided to walk in anyway. As I stood there, I overheard Sharon speaking to Pastor Bob in his office. She mentioned how excited she was for Monday night, expressing anticipation about spending time together due to my work covering the Monday night football games. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Their conversation turned intimate, with talk of booking a room at the La Quinta Inn and expressing longing for physical intimacy. Hearing this filled me with shock, nausea, and rising anger. I knew I had to leave before I did something rash. It was a struggle to walk away, but I couldn't bring myself to confront them in that moment. Despite my desire to confront them, I feared I might act impulsively and regret it later. I slipped out the same way I came in, hoping they hadn't noticed my presence. They had security cameras, but I entered through a side door they likely didn't monitor. As I drove away, it was one of the most difficult decisions I've ever made. I was so shaken that I knew I wouldn't be productive for the rest of the day, so I called the station to let them know I wasn't feeling well and would be heading home. I needed time to gather my thoughts, and home seemed like the best place for that. Sharon wouldn't be home until after 4 p.m., so I had plenty of time to contemplate. It was evident that Sharon was having an affair with Pastor Bob. I decided he would no longer be my pastor. In my mind, he became Bastard Bob, a fitting alteration. I needed to understand the extent of their relationship, how long it had been going on, and why it had started. While some people might prefer not to know these details, I was not one of them. I desperately wanted to understand why this had happened in my seemingly wonderful marriage. Clearly, Sharon didn't view our marriage as I did, and she wasn't the person I thought she was. I resolved to uncover everything I needed to know and address the situation head-on. I wasn't weak, and I would handle both of them accordingly. Once home, I brewed a pot of coffee and sat on the patio to gather my thoughts. The pleasant weather and fresh air helped me clear my mind as I contemplated the situation. I knew I would eventually figure it all out. I just needed to calm myself. I won't deny shedding a few tears that afternoon. While I understood that I didn't own Sharon or her body, it was devastating to think she would be intimate with another man, or men, after vowing herself to me on our wedding day. While some might not take those vows seriously, I certainly did, and I believed she did too. Experiencing something like that prompts you to question your entire set of values and wonder if you've been naive your whole life to believe in fidelity and love, along with all that accompanies it. The most damaging aspect of having a cheating partner isn't just the act of infidelity itself. It's the loss of belief in them and everything they say or do. You lose trust in them, the very foundation of your marriage, leaving you feeling exposed and afraid. Despite being 6'3" inches tall and weighing 190 pounds, I felt vulnerable and scared. It highlights how severely a cheating spouse can affect someone, knocking them down like nothing else could. As I sat there grappling with my emotions, striving to remain composed and rational so I could process everything, I realized there were past doubts I had dismissed due to my trust in Sharon. These seemingly insignificant issues, now accumulated, formed a heavy weight in the pit of my stomach as I pieced it all together. How could I have been so blind? Trust, that's how. I had placed my trust in her. Today that trust was shattered, and all those minor clues had merged into a burden that would be hard to bear. I needed facts. That's what I craved. I wanted to understand why this happened, how long it had been going on, how frequent it was, where it took place, and who else was involved. My trust was obliterated, but I was determined to uncover the answers I needed. I realized my marriage was a facade, and I would confront that reality. But first, I needed clarity. Unwilling to face Sharon yet without revealing my suspicions, I left the house at 3 p.m. to avoid being there when she returned. I drove into town, stopped at the station to gather some essentials for the next few days, and briefly spoke with my boss about needing time off early in the week to deal with personal matters. He seemed understanding, so I headed to Frankie's to pass the time, until I had to return home. At 5 p.m., I called Sharon to let her know I'd be stopping somewhere for a while and wouldn't be home for dinner. She expressed annoyance, mentioning she was feeling aroused and had plans for the evening, but if I stopped, those plans would be off the table. Yeah, like I'd want that aroused state caused by Bastard Bob. She might be in the mood, but it's because of him, not me. She can satisfy herself for all I care. I told her, "Sweetheart, I've already planned to stop by, so just stay excited for me, and I'll take care of you when I get back." I knew that would stir her up. She replied, "Don't count on it, pal. If you think you can treat me like that, you won't be getting any action for a while." To myself, I thought that's exactly what I wanted. I wasn't going to touch her again until I found out what was going on, and maybe never again. I arrived home around 10:30 p.m., pretty drunk, but not too drunk to notice the bedroom door locked. I smirked and banged on the door, figuring she was awake. I shouted, "Fine, if that's how you want it, don't expect me to tend to your needs. Just suffer." Then I headed for the spare bedroom, knowing she'd be furious. It would give me a break from explaining why I didn't want to be intimate with her. The next morning, she was sitting at the kitchen table with coffee when I walked in. I could feel the chill in the air as her stare pierced me. If I hadn't known about her infidelity, her look would have sent shivers down my spine. I grinned at her and said, "No need to get up and make breakfast, honey. I'll grab something on my way to golf." I left through the kitchen door, tossed my clubs in the trunk, and drove off. Shortly after, my phone rang. Seeing it was her, I ignored it. A few minutes later, I checked the message. She was furious. "You jerk! How could you do this to me? Get back here right now." Bastard? No, that was Bastard Bob, not me. If anyone deserved that title, it was him, not me. I had no intention of golfing. It just bought me some time. Instead, I drove straight to my former church. Did you think I'd ever want to hear Bastard Bob preach again? It was still early, so I knew no one would be around, and I was right. I entered the building. Yes, we had a key because my wife worked there, and headed straight to the offices. My objective was to install remote micro cameras and mini microphones in her office and in Bastard Bob's office. It didn't take long to accomplish, and I concealed the transmitter behind old hymnals in the supply closet across the hall. The receiver was wired into my car's electrical system, enabling me to monitor their conversations and activities whenever they were in their offices. While I didn't expect much activity at the church, I was confident that observing them and listening to their conversations for a few days would yield valuable information. After ensuring everything was functioning correctly, I searched through her desk but found nothing noteworthy. However, I noticed a significant asterisk on her calendar for Monday, aligning with what I had overheard on Friday. I prepared accordingly. Next, I investigated Bastard Bob's office, but had little success finding incriminating evidence until a last-minute revelation struck me. Inspired by my surroundings, after all, I was in a church, I searched through filing cabinets for receipts of church expenditures. Sure enough, I discovered a file containing receipts for the La Quinta Inn in Roswell. Some were from late 2005, and others from the spring of 2006. Aware that I was pushing my luck by lingering, I quickly made copies of the receipts and restored everything to its original state before leaving. I drove to the golf course, parked in my usual spot, and entered the clubhouse to ensure my presence was noted. I settled at a table, nursing a Sprite for a couple of hours, scrutinizing the bills. I realized that the two from late 2005 were both on Mondays, coinciding with dates when I attended a conference at CBS headquarters in New York. What infuriated me the most was Bastard Bob's audacity to charge those rooms to the church under the label of conference room rental for meetings. He was having an affair with my wife in a motel, and I had unknowingly footed the bill. Though we had contributed to the church financially, I vowed not to contribute any longer. Their situation was dire now. With just a bit more evidence, their fate would be sealed. I was certain this had been ongoing for nearly a year, if not longer, aligning with suspicions I had entertained earlier. My hunch was that Bastard Bob had been involved with her even before she started working for him. Initially, she held a good position at the Telfor Corporation as a receptionist. However, she eagerly embraced the opportunity to work for the church, citing its proximity to home and her desire to serve. She claimed the pay was comparable to her previous job, but it was evident she was more enticed by the extra perks. My anger was escalating by the minute. I couldn't fathom how naive I had been. It infuriated me, but it also sickened me to realize that the woman I had cherished throughout our marriage could betray me without a second thought. I was determined to make them pay. Feeling it was time to delve deeper into my investigation, I retrieved my iPod from the car and tuned it to pick up the frequency of the receiver I had placed in the trunk. As I scrolled through the data, I watched as Bastard Bob made his way into his office and dialed a number. I regretted not bugging his phone directly, realizing I would only hear one side of the conversation, but decided it was better than nothing. I listened in as Bob spoke. "Yes, Sharon, I'm at the church. I came right after you called. What's troubling you so much?" There was a pause, presumably for Sharon's reply, which I couldn't hear. Bob continued, querying, "Oh really? Has he done that before?" Another pause followed, allowing Sharon to respond. Bob pressed on. "I see. What do you think triggered his reaction?" Yet another pause indicated Sharon's explanation. Bob seemed concerned. "You don't suppose he's suspicious of us, do you, Sharon?" After a pause, Bob chuckled. "All right, well, you can get back at him on Monday night." He then hung up the phone and sat in deep thought. Just before I turned off the receiver, I caught him muttering something under his breath. I made sure to record that muttering, thinking it might be useful later. With the transmission ended, I headed home, anticipating a frosty reception. Upon arrival, I busied myself with chores, mowing the lawn and cleaning the basement, in an attempt to ease the tension. My wife, Sharon, was silent when I entered, but the air was thick with unspoken words. At dinner, Sharon couldn't hold back any longer. "Dick, what's going on with you lately? Why have you been acting this way?" I retorted, "Sharon, considering you locked me out of our bedroom last night, I think you should be pondering your actions. It's rare for me to go out with the guys, and the one time I do, you explode. This situation is on you." Her frustration boiled over. "Damn you," she snapped. I met her anger calmly. "Is that how a devout Christian woman should speak? Your actions hardly reflect your professed beliefs." Oh my goodness, her expression was unmistakable. Guilt was plastered all over her face so thickly that anyone seeing her would have known she was unfaithful. How she could have believed I wouldn't notice, I don't understand. I'll admit, though, she did manage to recover smoothly and eventually excused herself from the table. But I couldn't help thinking, when I reveal the truth, her recovery won't be so graceful. Later, she entered the family room where I was watching television. Confidentially, it was Fox News, attempting to find balanced news coverage. Her eyes seemed a bit swollen, suggesting she might have shed some tears. The remainder of the evening proceeded without any major incident, and when I was ready for bed, I simply walked down the hall to the spare bedroom and turned in. A few minutes later, she entered the room and stood there. "What's the matter?" I inquired. "Aren't you going to join me in bed?" she asked. "Nope, you made it clear that intimacy wasn't on the agenda, so I might as well sleep alone and get a good night's rest," I replied. With that, she hurriedly left the room in tears. Frankly, I felt indifferent. Sunday morning, she woke me at 8 a.m., dressed for church, and asked if I intended to join her. I responded, "No, I'm staying home today. You go ahead and be the model church lady, and I'll enjoy a relaxing day here." Once again, I noticed that familiar expression on her face. I sensed she was starting to grasp the situation, but she managed to compose herself once more. However, this time, as she turned and left the room, I thought I detected a hint of sadness in her eyes. A while later, I heard her car drive off. Later, she attempted to initiate a conversation, but I brushed her off, insisting she leave me alone. That concluded the day, and we both retreated to our separate spaces. Monday morning, I left the house without encountering or speaking to her. As I was leaving, my phone rang, and tearfully, she apologized, expressing her love and lamenting the situation. "We'll discuss everything when I return home tonight," I replied before ending the call. I informed my boss that I would still be off for the day, but would handle the Monday night football game as planned. He was pleased with my availability and inquired about my well-being, to which I responded with a generic, "as good as can be expected." My next destination was the La Quinta Inn in Roswell. At the lobby, I approached a young man named Kevin, who was stationed behind the check-in desk. I explained my situation candidly, stating that I suspected my wife of infidelity and that she would likely be at the motel that night with another man. Despite his initial skepticism, I offered him a deal. If he allowed me to place a microphone in the room to record their conversation, I would provide him with a couple of tickets to the next Falcons game. He negotiated for 4 tickets, which I agreed to, knowing I had access to them through the station. Eventually, he handed me the key to the only Whirlpool suite available. He was unaware that I planned not only to install a couple of mini microphones, but also to position a pair of micro cameras, much like the ones I had set up in the church offices. Additionally, I inserted a bug into the phone line to capture both sides of their conversations. After setting everything up, I conducted a test to ensure the transmission was clear, and the views from both the Whirlpool and the bed were satisfactory. Confident in the setup, I confirmed that the devices were discreetly hidden and exited the room. On my way out, I returned the key to Kevin at the front desk and handed him the tickets for next week's game as promised. Thanks, Kevin. I hope this all goes smoothly. Enjoy the game. With ample time to spare, I attended to several tasks I needed to address. I visited our bank and obtained cashier's checks for half of the funds from both our checking and savings accounts. I then proceeded to cancel our joint credit cards. Following that, I contacted my broker and arranged a meeting shortly after lunch to make adjustments to our investment accounts. He assured me everything would be prepared by the time I arrived. Next, I reached out to my attorney to discuss divorce proceedings and other related matters. We scheduled an appointment for later that afternoon when he would be available to meet with me. Finally, I drove to Planters National Bank in Marietta, Georgia, where I opened new accounts solely in my name and deposited the cashier's checks. I went for lunch in Marietta, although I had little appetite. Afterward, I drove to my broker's office to review the documents he had prepared. Essentially, they divided our investment portfolio equally, avoiding the need to sell assets and incur unnecessary tax liabilities. All that remained was for both Sharon and me to sign the papers. Taking the documents with me, I proceeded to meet my attorney. We discussed the divorce papers he had drafted. I agreed to pursue a no-fault divorce, proposing an equal split of assets if Sharon signed them promptly. However, in case she hesitated, I instructed him to include a provision for filing on grounds of adultery. I felt confident she would sign without delay. With everything arranged, all I needed was a quick dinner before heading to the station for the Monday Night Football broadcast. After leaving the attorney's office, I switched my cell phone back on and found a couple of messages from Sharon. In her messages, she expressed concern about my behavior and urged me to return home to discuss it before the game. Reading her messages, I couldn't help but feel a mix of anger and disbelief. Despite knowing her plans for the evening, she still reached out with words of love and worry. It dawned on me that I had been incredibly naive to love and trust her so completely. I had made a decision. The only chance of salvaging our marriage was if she didn't show up at the motel tonight. If she chose not to go, it would indicate that she cared enough to try to fix things, recognizing the trouble our marriage was in. At 8 p.m., I engaged the automated system for the evening's broadcast, which meant Monday Night Football was on the air. Concurrently, I prepared to monitor my setup in the motel room remotely. At exactly 8:15, Bob entered the room and made a phone call. "Hey, I've arrived. Can you come over as soon as possible?" he spoke into the phone. "I'll be there shortly," came the reply. After the call ended, he murmured something else, which I noted to review later for details. This could be the end of my marriage, I mused, though I doubted any change in our situation. The pain was real, fueling my resolve for some form of retribution. I went through my list of contacts, reaching out to each one. It took some time, but eventually, I contacted everyone necessary. By that time, Sharon had made it to the motel, so I turned my attention back to the surveillance. Their conversation was deeply personal and intimate, highlighting the complexity and secrecy of their relationship. The depth of their involvement was clear, and the situation was far from what anyone would have expected, especially given their public personas. Listening to them, I felt a mix of emotions. The discovery was shocking, especially considering their roles in the community. It was a moment of realization about the extent of their actions and the implications for all involved. I felt sick. My wife, a pastor, and a church secretary sinking into such depravity. In the moments that followed, I realized just how twisted they were. What they were about to receive tonight, they deserved. They deserved it all. She was on the bed in a compromising position, her posture suggesting readiness for an intimate encounter. The camera caught every detail, including the anticipation visible on her face, just before their interaction became more physical. Her exclamations were filled with mixed emotions, passion, and surprise as she engaged in the moment. "Oh, this is intense," she might have said, her voice reflecting the depth of their engagement. "This is what I needed," she added, affirming her consent and participation. He responded with boldness, perhaps too caught up in the moment. "This will be unforgettable," he claimed, omitting any crass references to me. Her responses to his actions were vocal, a series of sounds that conveyed her intense experience. "Continue. This is what I want," she urged, signaling her nearing peak of emotion. His final movements were decisive, marking a moment of closure for them, a moment that symbolized the end of one chapter for me and the beginning of another, filled with pain and the drive for retribution. After a moment, the scene shifted, showing a continuation of their engagement with renewed energy. Her reactions were vocal and repetitive, indicating the intensity of her experience. It was clear that what transpired was beyond my ability to comprehend fully or match. Her satisfaction was something I could never provide in the way he could. This realization was crushing, highlighting a disparity in our desires and capacities. The performance continued beyond what I could bear to witness. As they paused, presumably for a break, the reality of their connection, and my exclusion from it, sank in deeper. Choosing to act, I switched the broadcast to a mode that would reveal their actions to a wider audience, a decision driven by a mix of hurt and a desire for vindication. As the phone started to ring, signaling the beginning of the fallout, I steeled myself against the incoming storm, ready to face the consequences of exposing a hidden truth. I dialed Sharon's number, my heart pounding as the dial tone echoed through the silent room. On the other end, I could almost picture her, glancing at the caller ID with a dismissive smirk. "It's Dick," Sharon said, presumably to Bob, her voice laced with defiance. "This time I'm not answering. Let's see how he likes that. Keep going, honey, while he's on the line." Frustrated, I disconnected and tried again, my determination growing. This time, Sharon seemed to reconsider, her voice barely audible as she decided, "Guess I better take it," before she fumbled for her phone. "Hello, Dick," she answered, her tone cold and unwelcoming. "Sharon, where are you? What are you up to?" I pressed, seeking any hint of truth in her voice. "I decided to go shopping since you didn't call earlier. Now I'm just grabbing a bite before heading home," she lied smoothly, her words a sharp contrast to the reality I knew. "Shopping at this hour?" I pushed further, skepticism coloring my tone. "Yeah, and I plan to splurge," she shot back, defiance in her voice. "Fantastic, Sharon. Thanks for being such a wonderful wife," I replied, the sarcasm in my voice barely masking the pain. "Don't talk to me like that, you jerk. I don't know what's gotten into you. Goodbye," she snapped, ending the call with a finality that stung. As I pondered their continuing betrayal, a plan formed in my mind. I decided to interrupt their tryst, not with another direct call to Sharon, knowing she wouldn't answer, but by calling the motel directly. "Kevin, it's Dick. Watching Monday Night Football? No? Well, you might want to start. Could you ring the Whirlpool suite for me?" I asked, masking my turmoil with casual conversation. After a brief pause, Bob's voice came through. "Hey, what do you want, Dick?" It was my turn to confront them. "Bastard Bob, let me speak to Sharon, will you?" I demanded, a calm facade over my boiling anger. Sharon's confused voice then joined. "Dick, why are you calling here?" "Sharon, I know everything. The cheating, the lies. I'm filing for divorce and you're getting out. And Bob, you're not getting off easy either," I declared, my voice steady with resolve. "What's wrong with you, Dick? I can't understand you lately," she retorted, her confusion feigned. "It's over, Sharon. Maybe you should tune into Monday Night Football for a change. Enjoy the show." "Goodbye," I said, hanging up, my decision final and my heart heavy with the weight of ending. On the live monitor, I watched her switch on the TV and witnessed the shocking video of her and Bastard Bob. With a delayed reaction, she saw what the entire Atlanta area had witnessed. "Oh no, oh no, oh no," she repeated as she hastily dressed and fled the room. Bastard Bob was eager to leave, cursing all the while. "I will destroy that son of a witch," he muttered. Bastard Bob should watch what he mumbles. It could come back to haunt him. Once they left, I powered down the monitors and let the video play to the end. Then, I switched off the live assist mode and returned the system to fully automated broadcast mode. Grabbing the tape, I left the broadcast booth, likely for the last time, taking a few personal items from my desk. Now, you're caught up. I spent the rest of the night at Frankie's, and yes, my halftime show was the hot topic. After the game, I hailed a cab home. Sharon was sitting in the darkened living room when I arrived, the phone off the hook, tears evident. She wept profusely, but I was indifferent. It was over for me. "How could you do this to me, Dick?" she sobbed. "After all these years together, how?" "No, Sharon," I countered. "The real question is, how could you do this to me?" "I'm drunk. I'm going to bed. We'll talk tomorrow," she said. She remained on the sofa the next morning, looking exhausted. It seemed she hadn't slept, but again, I didn't care. She brought this upon herself. I replaced the phone on the hook, and it immediately began to ring. For the next hour and a half, I fielded calls from family, friends, church members, my former boss, and both of my daughters. They were deeply disturbed by what they witnessed, and nothing I said could soothe them. I understood it was harsh for them to witness, but they're adults and will eventually overcome it. Mrs. Bastard Bob called too, inquiring if I had a tape of the incident. I assured her I kept a copy in safekeeping and would provide it if needed. Clearly, everyone I contacted had seen the Monday Night Football halftime show. Some were upset due to its explicit content, while others, like her parents, criticized me for exposing her. However, most were supportive and empathetic, recognizing the difficulty of the situation. It was a challenging experience, but a consequence I had to face for my actions. Sharon remained tearful throughout. Eventually, I left the phone off the hook and made myself coffee. Returning, I offered her some and presented the divorce papers and investment documents for her to sign. "I'm filing for divorce, Sharon," I said firmly. "After what I discovered and saw last night, it's clear to me that you've been unfaithful for quite some time. I can't stay in this marriage knowing that. The documents I've prepared are for a no-fault divorce, and I'm proposing we split everything equally. I need you to sign the divorce papers and the agreement on how we'll divide our investments today. There's no room for negotiation on this. The terms I've offered are more than fair. You have until 5 p.m. today to get legal advice and agree to my terms. If you don't, after 5:01 p.m., I'll proceed with filing for divorce on grounds of adultery and aim for a division of property that reflects our individual contributions and earnings, which would largely benefit me. This is your best option. I want to make it clear that contesting this by alleging adultery would be unwise. It will become public knowledge in Atlanta, and you'll be seen for what you've done with Bob. You need to consider this carefully. Sharon, take this offer. It's the best way forward for both of us." "Dick, I still love you. I want to fix our marriage. Can't we try to work things out?" Sharon pleaded. "The problem isn't about love. It's about your choices and actions. You've put someone else before our marriage, and I can't overlook that. You need to sort this out and talk to your lawyer as soon as possible." After some time, Sharon came back with the documents signed. "My lawyer reviewed everything and agrees that your offer is fair under the circumstances," she informed me, her voice carrying a mix of resignation and hope. "Dick, is there any chance we could talk? I'd like to explain my side and see if there's any possibility for us to reconcile," she added, looking for a glimmer of hope. I decided to hear her out, curious about her reasoning and whether this was an isolated incident or indicative of deeper issues in our relationship. We sat at the kitchen table, and she recounted everything to me. There were no others involved. It began shortly before she started working for Bastard Bob. She admitted she didn't know why, as she was content with me, but something about Bastard Bob attracted her, perhaps his charisma. She believed he loved her. I acknowledged his charisma, but shattered her illusion when I played back 2 sound bites I'd saved of him. The first was from that initial day. "That idiotic woman better keep her affair with me hidden from her husband. Despite her sweet and willing nature, she'll be gone soon. It was easy to seduce her, but she needs to go." The second was from just before her arrival. "I'll ravage her tonight and fire her tomorrow. If she protests, I'll threaten to expose her to Dick. I can't risk him finding out. So Sharon, You not only wrecked our marriage but misjudged Bastard Bob's feelings. To him, you were just a toy, a demeaned witch. I saw how he treated you and how you enjoyed it. I never satisfied you like that because I saw you as a loving wife, not a witch. There's no way I can stay married to you. You violated our vows, and I can't ignore that. Plus, you'd never be content with me again. No matter our love, we can't overcome the damage you caused." She remained seated, tears flowing, acknowledging the truth in my words. Eventually, she signed both sets of papers. I informed her I'd be relocating, offering her time to find new accommodations. Financially, I doubted she could maintain the house, and I had no desire to reside there amidst countless memories. Thus, our agreement stipulated the house's sale, with proceeds split equally like our other assets. After collecting my papers and pre-packed bags, I departed, dropping off documents at my broker's before settling in a hotel for the night. The following day, I met with my attorney, who promptly filed the divorce papers with the county's Superior Court. We also addressed my legal woes at the station and with the FCC. He outlined potential consequences, including hefty fines and career repercussions. While jail seemed unlikely, significant financial penalties loomed, signaling an end to my broadcasting career. Within days, repercussions materialized. FCC served me, initiating a legal battle that would drain my savings, amounting to nearly a year's salary. Even worse, my broadcast license got revoked, barring me from my profession for 2 years. The silver lining, however, came from TT, who, despite the illegal and spiteful nature of my actions, offered me a job with responsibilities that complied with FCC restrictions. It turned out TT had sympathy for me, likely influenced by his own bitter divorce experience with Henry's daughter and Peter's sister. I found some appreciation for TT in that regard. Bastard Bob confronted me once at Frankie's, seemingly ready for a physical altercation. However, I ended up pinning him down, asserting my dominance. "Now, Bastard Bob, I don't want to hear from you again. Is that clear?" I asserted. His response? "Forget you." Perhaps he needed another reminder, so I nudged him in the ribs. "Bastard Bob, I have an audio recording of you threatening me. If I take it to the police, I could get a restraining order against you and press assault charges. With that evidence, you might end up in prison. Is that what you want?" I questioned. He shook his head in refusal. As I delivered one final kick for good measure, I remarked, "Well, I suppose this marks the end of our conversation. Although he's no longer a pastor, he's still the same despicable person. He got ousted from the church, and his ordination was revoked by the denomination. Last I heard, he found employment at a city travel agency. Despite his charisma, he'll need to make ends meet, especially since his wife successfully sued him for divorce on grounds of adultery, resulting in a substantial settlement against him. My incriminating tape likely played a significant role in her victory, despite its questionable legality. I'm moving forward with my life. While it's not perfect, I'm discovering ways to find happiness. I've casually dated a few women in recent months, but haven't committed to any serious relationships. I've abstained from sexual activity because I believe in reserving it for marriage, steadfast in my values even if others disagree. When I encounter the right partner, I'll marry her, and together we'll experience the joys of intimacy as intended. I'm patient, confident that the right person will come along in due time, and I'm willing to wait until then. I occasionally encounter Sharon at events like Stephanie's college graduation and Melanie's baby's baptism. While I maintain civility, I've made it clear that my presence isn't for her benefit. I'm not interested in friendship or any form of connection. It's evident that she's not content. I can sense her emotional turmoil stemming from our breakup, and she likely regrets her actions. However, her regret doesn't change the fact that she betrayed our marriage by becoming involved with another man. While some might forgive such transgressions, my moral code is firm, leaving little room for leniency. She'll have to live with the knowledge that she sacrificed a life with me for her affair with Bastard Bob. Despite my profound love for her, she discarded it all. Moreover, her involvement in the infamous Monday Night Football incident has tarnished her reputation irreparably. Everyone who witnessed it now views her as promiscuous. I've heard she receives numerous date offers, but to her credit, she hasn't accepted any. It must be agonizing to know that most of these men view her as nothing more than a conquest. It's not a dignified way to navigate life, but it's a consequence of her actions. she brought it upon herself.
I didn't expect it at all. I mean, how could I? Sitting there at the dinner table, enjoying the quiet after a long day, my 42-year-old wife, Sarah, looks me dead in the eye and tells me she's going out to dinner with a colleague. Yeah, I know what you're thinking. Dinner with a colleague sounds innocent enough, right? But let's not sugarcoat it. This wasn't just a friendly dinner. It was a date. A full-on, no-holds-barred date with some guy she works with. And she just threw it out there like it was nothing. Now let me backtrack a bit. Sarah and I got married when she was 22. Young, naive, and pregnant. We barely had a clue what we were doing, but we went through with it anyway, like so many young couples do. It's funny, looking back now, people in their 20s these days seem so much more put together than we ever were. But at the time, it felt like the right move. And it wasn't all bad. There were good years, especially at the start. After we tied the knot, I started investing. I'd always had a knack for numbers, and I built a business around it, turning my company into something successful. We became well off, more than comfortable, really. I gave Sarah and our family a life a lot of people would envy. But no amount of money could fix what came next. We had a son, our pride and joy. But he was born sick, real sick. And let me tell you, there's nothing worse than watching your child suffer and knowing that, despite all the money, all the doctors, all the treatments, you can't save him. That kind of helplessness stays with you, haunts you. Our son passed away after years of battling his illness. And Sarah, well, Sarah changed. She withdrew. I get it, grief does that to people. But she didn't just shut down, she shut me out. Completely. We were still married on paper, but emotionally, physically, we might as well have been strangers sharing the same space. I tried everything I could think of. Therapy, vacations, time off work, anything to get her back. But nothing worked. For years, she was like a ghost living in our house, unreachable. It took psychologists a long time to get her to open up even a little. Things improved after a while, but not by much. She wasn't the same, and I wasn't sure she'd ever be again. So, fast forward to that night at the dinner table. She drops the bombshell. She's going out with this guy, her colleague. She had the nerve to act like it was no big deal. He's just a friend, she said. He's been so supportive, and I just need someone to talk to. Yeah, right. I'm not stupid. This wasn't just about talking. Her morale was better, she said. Her energy was up, thanks to him. At that moment, I didn't know what to say. My brain just froze. I mean, how do you respond when your wife casually tells you she's going on a date with another man? I didn't want to explode. I didn't want to argue, so I just stood up and walked out of the kitchen. I didn't even grab my keys, my phone, nothing. I just walked, and she ran after me. I'll never forget the sound of her voice, full of desperation, like she knew she had pushed things too far. Wait, she called, her footsteps quick behind me. It's not like that. Please, just listen. But I didn't want to listen. I mean, what was she going to say that could possibly justify this? That it wasn't a betrayal? That this was somehow normal? She begged me to believe her. She said it wasn't cheating. She told me that he was just a colleague and that I was making this out to be worse than it really was. But then she threw in the kicker. He's helped me feel alive again, she said. You don't understand how much I've needed this. Needed what, exactly? A dinner? A man who's not me? I was too angry to respond. But one thing was crystal clear. If I told her not to go, she'd still go. I know her. Sarah's the type of woman who always gets what she wants, no matter the cost. The problem is she never seems to think about how high the price might be. I needed to figure out what to do next. I wasn't going to just let this slide. No way. I put up with a lot from her over the years, but this was crossing a line I couldn't ignore. I needed proof. Cold, hard proof of what she was up to. So I called a buddy of mine who knows people. The kind of people who can dig into someone's life and find out everything there is to know. I told him the situation, and he hooked me up with a private investigator. I wanted it all. Who this guy was, how he lived, what his intentions were. I wanted to know where they went, what they talked about, what they did. And yeah, I wanted pictures. I wanted to see them together, up close and personal. Because here's the thing, deep down, I knew this was more than just dinner. I could feel it in my gut. Something was off, and I wasn't about to sit back and watch my life fall apart without knowing exactly what was happening behind my back. So, that's where I left things. The PI was on the job, and I was waiting to find out who this guy was, what my wife was really up to, and how the hell I was supposed to deal with it. And yeah, I know what you're thinking. Why didn't I just confront her head on? Right then and there. Well, I've learned over the years that sometimes you've got to be patient. Let the truth come to you. And when it does, you hit back hard. But for now, I waited. And that, my friends, is where it all started. The detective didn't waste any time. A few days after I gave him the green light, he came back with the first bit of intel on this guy, Bob. Yeah, his name was Bob. It's always some guy with a boring, regular name, isn't it? But don't let that fool you. Bob wasn't just some nobody. He had a family, 2 kids, a wife, a decent job. The guy lived in a nice house, one of those suburban McMansions with a white picket fence and probably a dog in the yard. The whole picture-perfect life. But you know what they say about appearances, right? Underneath that surface, people like Bob, they're all hiding something. And I was going to find out exactly what that was. The detective didn't just give me the basics either. He went deep. I got everything. Bob's home address, where his kids went to school, what his wife did for work, even what kind of car he drove. All of it laid out for me, like a dossier on the guy who apparently was so supportive of my wife that she felt the need to dress up and go out with him. I stared at his photo for a long time. The dude looked harmless enough, like some average middle-aged guy who'd rather be watching sports than sneaking around with another man's wife. But looks can be deceiving, and I wasn't taking any chances. I'm not stupid. I knew Sarah wasn't telling me the full story, and I wasn't about to sit around waiting for her to come clean. So I started planning. You see, when you've got the kind of money I do, you can make things happen. Big things. And I didn't care how much it cost. This was about my pride, about finding out the truth and getting my revenge. My next move? Well, it required a certain type of person, and I knew just who to talk to about that. I reached out to an old friend. This guy, let's call him Mike, had connections in all the right places, if you know what I mean. He owed me a few favors from way back, and when I told him what was going on, he didn't hesitate. He got in touch with someone almost immediately. This girl, well, let's just say she was exactly what I needed. She was young, 27, maybe 28 at most. Blonde, with legs for days and a face that would make any man do a double take. The kind of woman who could make someone like Bob forget all about his nice little family in the suburbs. When Mike showed me her picture, I didn't even have to think about it. I gave the go-ahead right away. She was perfect. And yeah, I know what you're thinking. You probably have a pretty good idea what this girl does for a living, but I'm not going to spell it out here. I know how Reddit works, and I'm not about to get this post flagged for inappropriate content. Let's just say she was very professional and leave it at that. With her on board, the plan was really coming together. But I wasn't going to stop at just setting Bob up. No, I wanted to cover all my bases. That's why I also put a guy on him, Mateo. This wasn't just about Sarah anymore. I wanted to know what Bob was doing when he wasn't with her, how he spent his time, who else he might be seeing. I needed a full picture, not just some half-assed snapshot of a single date. The private investigator was still digging up dirt, and I had the girl ready to make her move. I was confident that everything would play out just how I wanted. Bob would slip up, guys like him always do, and when he did, I'd be right there to catch him in the act, with all the evidence I needed. But then, out of nowhere, the whole thing nearly blew up in my face. It was the day before the supposed date with Bob when Sarah dropped a bomb on me. We were sitting in the kitchen, and I was playing it cool, acting like I wasn't planning her whole downfall behind the scenes. She looked up from her phone and casually said, "I've been thinking. I'm not going to meet Bob tomorrow after all." For a second, I couldn't even process what she was saying. She wasn't going? After all the effort I'd put into this, after I had everything set up to catch her and Bob red-handed, what the hell was going on? I forced myself to stay calm. Oh, I asked, pretending to be nonchalant about it. Why not? She hesitated for a moment, then said, I just changed my mind. I don't think it's appropriate. Instead, I'm going to meet up with a friend. We're going to grab dinner at that new restaurant downtown. I stared at her, my mind racing. Something about this didn't sit right with me. Sure, maybe she had changed her mind about Bob. Maybe she realized how fucked up it would be to actually go through with it. But something about the way she said it felt off. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more going on here than she was letting on. And when Sarah said she was meeting a friend, I had to wonder if this friend was someone else entirely. Was it still Bob? Or was there another guy in the picture? I knew better than to push her on it, though. If I showed too much interest, she'd get suspicious. So I nodded and let her think I was okay with it. But deep down, I wasn't about to let her off the hook that easily. No, the plan was still on. I wasn't going to call off the private investigator or the girl just because Sarah had a sudden change of heart. Whatever she was doing, whether it was with Bob or not, I was going to find out. She could change the narrative all she wanted, but at this point, I had too much riding on the outcome. So, I sat back, pretending everything was fine, while behind the scenes, I set the wheels in motion. And believe me, I was going to catch her. One way or another, Sarah was going to slip up. And when she did, I'd be ready. My gut had been right all along. Sarah was still planning to go on that date with Bob. It didn't matter what she had told me in the kitchen. Her actions spoke louder than her words. The detective confirmed it for me when he sent over the latest update. She had booked a table for two at a nice restaurant, the kind of place we used to go to when things were good between us. But that wasn't the worst part. She also rented a hotel room. And not just any room, a room that cost $400 a night. The kind of room you don't just rent to talk. I knew what was going on. It didn't take a genius to figure it out. Dinner, drinks, and then a night in that expensive hotel with Bob. I could feel my blood boiling just thinking about it. But I had to stay focused. This wasn't the time to lose my cool. I had to act, and I had to act smart. First things first, I assigned one of the two detectives to watch Bob's house. I needed to know if Bob's wife was going to be home while my wife was out screwing around with him. It was part of the plan, and everything had to be timed perfectly. The goal wasn't just to catch Sarah and Bob in the act. I needed to blow up his life too. So, we waited. That's the worst part of this kind of thing. The waiting. Knowing what's happening, knowing what's about to go down, but having to sit on your hands and wait for the right moment to strike. Then the first piece of evidence came in. A photo. It showed Sarah sitting at the table with Bob, looking all cozy, like she didn't have a husband waiting for her at home. But that wasn't what set me off. No, what really made my blood boil was the second photo that followed. It showed them kissing, right there in the middle of the restaurant, like they didn't have a care in the world. Like everything they were doing was perfectly normal. I wanted to lose it. I wanted to punch a hole in the wall, smash something, anything, but I had to keep my head straight. This was just the beginning. I knew they wouldn't stop at the restaurant. The hotel room was waiting, and I had no doubt they were headed there next. But before they could get there, I had another move to make. I called the detective who was stationed outside Bob's house. Is she home? I asked, referring to Bob's wife. Yeah, she's home, he confirmed. Perfect. That was all I needed. I sent the detective the photo of Bob and Sarah kissing, along with some very specific instructions. I'll never forget the rush of satisfaction I felt when I imagined how this was going to play out. The detective knocked on the door, and when Bob's wife answered, she was probably expecting something routine. But what she got was anything but. The detective didn't mince words. He asked her if she knew where her husband was. Of course, she didn't. Bob had told her he'd be working late, just like he probably always did when he snuck around behind her back. So when the detective asked her again, she got nervous. I could almost picture her panic, thinking something terrible had happened to him. But the detective reassured her. No, he's fine, he said, but I think you should take a look at this. He handed her the photo, the one of Bob kissing Sarah, and I can only imagine the look on her face. Her world probably started crumbling right there on the doorstep. She stammered something about how Bob was supposed to be at work, that he'd said he'd be home late. But the detective cut her off, calmly letting her know that her husband wasn't working late. He was on a date. I knew exactly what would happen next. As soon as the detective walked away, Bob's wife would be dialing his number, screaming into the phone, demanding answers. And when he saw her name pop up, I bet Bob's heart would skip a beat. He'd make up some excuse, try to calm her down, but she wouldn't be having any of it. No, she'd be in full panic mode. And just like I expected, Bob would rush home, desperate to salvage whatever he could of his mess of a life. While that shitstorm was brewing on Bob's end, I was sitting at home, waiting for Sarah to come back. I had her picture in my hand, the one of her kissing Bob, and I'll tell you what, that was the last time I'd ever feel anything for her again. That image was burned into my brain, and whatever love or respect I still had for her was long gone. But that wasn't the end of it. Not by a long shot. I had more up my sleeve. This wasn't just about catching her in the act or humiliating Bob. No, this was about completely dismantling everything. And while I sat there waiting for Sarah, I was already putting the finishing touches on the next part of my plan. You see, Sarah thought she was clever, thought she could pull this off without consequence. But she didn't realize who she was dealing with. I'd spent years building a business, making connections, learning how to take control of situations and turn them to my advantage. This was just another deal to me, another problem that needed to be solved. And when I was done, she and Bob were going to regret every decision that led them to that dinner table. The moment of revenge was finally within reach. I've been playing the long game, watching everything unfold, and now it was time to pull the trigger. Do you remember that blonde girl I mentioned? The one with the stunning looks, perfect blonde hair, legs that didn't seem to quit, and a body that could make any man forget his own name? Well, if you didn't pick up on it before, let me make it clearer now. She wasn't just some random girl I met. No, she was the tool I needed to set the final piece of my plan in motion. You might have guessed what her profession was, but I'll keep it vague here for obvious reasons. When Sarah left for her date, the blonde was already at my house waiting. She looked even better in person, dressed in this sleek, tight dress that left little to the imagination. We sat down, shared a few glasses of wine. To be honest, I needed the wine more than she did. I was on edge, not from nerves exactly, but from the anticipation. The knowledge of what I was about to do weighed on me. It's not every day you plan to cheat on your wife, even if it's for revenge. But then again, was this even cheating? Could it be called that when she had already blown up our marriage with Bob? It didn't feel like betrayal, not on my part. This was payback. After a couple more glasses, we headed upstairs. Now let me make one thing clear. There was nothing romantic about what happened next. This wasn't passion. This wasn't love. It wasn't even lust, to be honest. It was just a transaction, something that needed to be done to close the loop on what Sarah had started. The blonde girl was good at what she did, but my mind was elsewhere the whole time. I wasn't thinking about her. I wasn't even really thinking about Sarah at that moment. It was like going through the motions. We started having sex, but it felt more like checking off a box than anything else. There was no emotion, no satisfaction. I wasn't there for the pleasure. This was business. I remember lying there, going through the process, and all I could think about was how Sarah would react when she walked through that door. The shock on her face when she saw me in bed with another woman. That was what I was waiting for. That was the only part of this that mattered. And sure enough, right on schedule, the front door opened. I heard it creak, followed by her footsteps echoing through the hallway. We didn't stop. I didn't pause, didn't hesitate. I wanted her to walk in on it. I wanted her to see it all. When Sarah finally stepped into the room and saw us, her scream was immediate. She screamed like she had just walked into the middle of a crime scene, and maybe she had. She froze in the doorway, her eyes wide, her face pale, completely stunned by what she was witnessing. It was like everything in her world was crumbling around her in real time, and she couldn't process it. The blonde didn't linger. She got dressed so quickly. You'd think she had been preparing for this exact scenario her whole life. She didn't say a word, didn't even look back as she slipped out of the room and out the front door, leaving Sarah and me alone to deal with the fallout. And then Sarah exploded. I'd seen her angry before, but this was something different. It was like she had lost control of herself completely. She screamed at me, accusing me of betraying her, of being the reason our marriage was falling apart. I couldn't help but laugh, though it was a bitter, humorless laugh. Here she was, yelling at me as if she hadn't just been out with Bob, booking hotel rooms and playing the perfect little mistress. I let her scream for a bit, just watching her unravel. She was pacing back and forth, throwing her hands up, cursing me, calling me every name in the book. And I just stood there, waiting for her to run out of steam. When she finally paused to catch her breath, I pulled out my phone and showed her the photo, the one of her and Bob, mid-kiss in the restaurant. The one she thought no one would ever see. I know about the hotel, I said calmly, holding the phone up to her face so she could see the proof. The one you rented for tonight. The one you thought you'd be spending the night in with Bob. Her expression changed instantly. Gone was the anger, the righteous indignation. It was replaced by shock, maybe even a little fear. She stammered something, tried to explain herself, but I wasn't interested in her excuses. You're staying there tonight, I said, my voice cold. That room isn't going to waste. For a second, she didn't say anything. I could see the gears turning in her head, trying to figure out how to salvage this, how to turn it around and make herself the victim. But she couldn't. Not this time. She was caught, and she knew it. She tried to fight back, to throw more blame my way. How could you do this? She screamed, her voice trembling. After everything we've been through, you're the one who's cheating now? How can you live with yourself? I just shook my head. You think I'm the one who's to blame here? I asked, incredulous. You went out with another man. You rented a hotel room with plans to sleep with him. Don't stand there and act like you're innocent in all this. She kept trying to argue, to make it seem like what I had done was worse than what she had been doing for God knows how long. But I wasn't playing her game anymore. I stood my ground, kept my voice level, and told her how it was. I told her that this was her fault, that everything that had happened, from her emotional distance to her affair with Bob, had led us to this exact moment. Eventually, she gave up. She grabbed her purse, fumbled for her phone, and called a taxi. I didn't stop her. I just watched her pack up her things, knowing she was going to that hotel room she had rented for Bob. Only now, she'd be spending the night there alone. When the door finally slammed shut behind her, I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no relief. Just a cold, empty space where our life together used to be. Sure, the revenge was satisfying in a way, but it didn't fill the void she had left in our marriage. It didn't fix anything. All it did was bring everything to its inevitable end. But this wasn't the end of the story. Not yet. The next part of my plan? That was already in motion. And when it was done, Sarah wouldn't just be humiliated. She'd be destroyed. Filing for divorce was the final nail in the coffin. After everything that had happened, the lies, the cheating, the betrayal, it was the only logical step. I wasn't interested in trying to salvage anything anymore. I wasn't interested in her excuses, her tears, or her attempts to rewrite history. As far as I was concerned, our marriage had ended the moment she stepped out with Bob. The rest was just formalities. I didn't waste any time. I hired the best lawyers money could buy. No half measures, no cutting corners. These guys were sharks, the kind of attorneys who didn't just win cases. They annihilated the opposition. I knew I was in good hands. We sat down, went over everything, and I laid out exactly what I wanted. I wanted her out of my life for good, and I wanted to make sure she walked away with as little as possible. This wasn't about being fair. This was about making sure she paid the price for everything she had done. And trust me, I had the resources to make sure that happened. The first thing I did was block her on my phone. I didn't want to hear from her, didn't want to read her texts, didn't want to listen to her voicemails. Every possible method of communication blocked. If she needed to reach me, she'd have to do it through the lawyers. There was nothing left to say anyway. The moment she left for that hotel, any last shred of care or concern I had for her vanished. We were done. The divorce process, as expected, took time. A lot of time. These things never go quickly, especially when there's money involved. And we had a lot of it to fight over. The house, the assets, the business, it was all on the table. Sarah tried to play hardball at first. She thought she was entitled to half of everything. Thought she could walk away from our marriage with a clean slate and a fat bank account. But she underestimated me. She underestimated what I was willing to do to make sure she got what she deserved, and only what she deserved. We had court dates, meetings with lawyers, depositions, the whole ugly process. And you know what? Not once did we talk. Every time we saw each other in the courtroom, we didn't say a word. We barely even looked at each other. I'd glance over and see her sitting there, trying to look composed, but I could tell she was cracking. She was unraveling under the pressure. This wasn't the Sarah I had married. This was a woman desperately trying to hold on to whatever she could, but she was slipping, and she knew it. My lawyers were relentless. They tore her apart in every negotiation, every hearing. They found every loophole, every clause in our prenup, every bit of financial evidence that worked in my favor. And, of course, the photos of her with Bob? Those were the final blow. The evidence of her infidelity was ironclad. She couldn't deny it. She couldn't spin it. She was caught. And the court saw it for what it was, her fault. Her affair. Her destruction of our marriage. The process dragged on for months. At times, it felt like it would never end. But I was patient. I wasn't in a rush. Every day that passed, I knew we were getting closer to the end, and I knew I was winning. I could see it in her face, the way she carried herself, defeated, humiliated. She had gone from trying to fight me tooth and nail to barely showing up to the hearings. I think, deep down, she knew there was no way out for her. Not this time. And then, finally, after what felt like an eternity, the day came when it was all over. The judge handed down the final ruling, and it was exactly what I had hoped for. I walked away with nearly everything: the house, the business, the majority of our assets. Sarah? She was left with scraps. A small, meager settlement that wouldn't last her more than a few months. She tried to argue for more, tried to claim that she needed support, but the evidence was against her. The court sided with me on every major point. It was over. I'll never forget the look on her face when the final ruling was read. It was a mix of disbelief, anger, and something else. Maybe regret? I don't know. I didn't care. All I knew was that I had won. I had taken everything from her, just like she had tried to take everything from me. And she was left with almost nothing. As we left the courtroom that last day, I didn't say a word to her. There was nothing left to say. We were done, finally completely done. I didn't look back as I walked out the door, and I haven't looked back since. But the truth is, even with all of this behind me, there's no real satisfaction. Sure, I took almost everything from her. Sure, she's out of my life. But there's no victory in this. No feeling of triumph. What's left is just the empty aftermath of a marriage that should have ended long before it did. I won the battle, but the war? The war was hell, and nobody really comes out of that unscathed. It's strange, to be on the other side of all that chaos. To look back at everything, the lies, the betrayal, the divorce, and realize it's finally over. For a long time, it felt like I'd never get to this point, like the mess Sarah had created would follow me forever. But here I am, standing, living, moving forward. The first few months after the divorce were rough. Not gonna lie, I thought that once everything was settled, I'd feel some kind of relief. I thought maybe winning, taking everything from her, would make me feel whole again. But the truth is, nothing really prepares you for the aftermath. You can't just switch off the years of history, the emotional scars, and the weight of it all. There's no magic moment where everything goes back to normal. You have to rebuild. And rebuilding? That takes time. I had to relearn who I was outside of my marriage, outside of the anger and revenge. For so long, everything had been about her, about catching her, exposing her, and getting back at her. Once that was over, I had to figure out what was left of me. I threw myself into my work, expanded my business even further. I poured all my focus into it, and it paid off. The company is thriving, better than ever, and financially, I'm in a great place. Money never solves all your problems, but I'll be honest, it makes things a hell of a lot easier when you're trying to rebuild your life. Therapy helped too. I didn't want to admit it at first, didn't want to sit in front of some stranger and spill my guts. But it worked. I learned how to let go of some of the anger, some of the bitterness. You carry that stuff around for too long, it'll eat you alive. It was a slow process, though. It wasn't like some overnight transformation. It was more like chipping away at a wall, bit by bit, until eventually you can see what's on the other side. I started taking better care of myself, too, physically and mentally. I got back into working out, eating better, and making time for the things I enjoy. I found hobbies I'd forgotten about, things that had nothing to do with Sarah or our marriage. It helped me create a life that felt like mine again, not just something left in the wreckage of what we had. But relationships? That's a different story. I'm not looking for anything. I've learned that some things in life just aren't for me, and relationships might be one of those things. I don't trust the idea of love anymore, not in the way I used to. After everything I've been through, it's hard to imagine letting anyone get that close again, giving someone that kind of power over me. I know people say you should never let one bad experience define you. But this wasn't just one bad experience. This was my whole world, and it collapsed. And honestly, I'm okay with it. I'm okay with being on my own. Some people think you need someone else to complete you, to make life meaningful, but I've learned that's bullshit. You can be whole on your own. You can find peace, happiness, and satisfaction without needing someone else by your side. I don't need a relationship to feel like my life has purpose. These days, my focus is on me, my work, my health, my future. I travel when I wanna, I spend time with friends, I live my life without any drama or bullshit weighing me down. It's simple, it's quiet, and it's exactly what I need. Will I ever change my mind? Maybe. Who knows what the future holds? But for now, I'm done with love, with relationships, with putting my heart on the line for someone else. I've learned that sometimes the only person you can really count on is yourself. And that's enough for me. So yeah, I'm doing well. Better than I have in years. And if that means staying single, staying focused on myself, then so be it. I've earned this peace, and I'm not about to give it up for anyone. Not anymore.